Bat.
Yeah. Eat the Febreze. I
Right.
think we're live. Yeah, we're live, apparently. Welcome to the latest amazing episode of Prince and Owen Chat. Prince actually was on the Classic Adventure Gaming podcast, episode 2, which comes up roughly every 6 months, which came out yesterday, hosted by
Uh,
Gus B.
Very much so, yes. The Canopy Adventure Gaming podcast. That's correct. Very
Fantasy,
cool.
yeah. I don't know, where is that hosted? Where is CAG hosted?
I'll throw up a link. It's on Spotify. Maybe
Yeah,
we'll
great.
put a link in the description of the video. It
Yeah.
was quite
What would
the video.
Yeah, I can do that. I can add it afterwards as well. What was the topics last night? I know it was like 8 hours of you speaking and then about 20 minutes of everyone else. But what else
Yeah, it
happened?
was mostly I was mostly relating tales and anecdotes from my childhood that I found to be particularly relevant to the discussion. And then, in the very short pauses when I was drinking a glass of water because my throat had got so parched, then they briefly discussed dungeon design. Actually,
Yeah, yeah. They had obviously seen our recent episode and been like, "Man, we need to catch up on
we need
that."
to
Because
steal from
yeah,
that.
still,
No, it was I think it would be a nice complementary sort of bit, and
yeah,
obviously, both EOTB and Gabor Lux are both very skillful, um, experienced, as well as very knowledgeable DMs. So
mm, yeah.
definitely, I would say check it out if you have any interest in the subject of dungeon design.
We'll be touching on some of Gabor's adventure design, or I will at least, not necessarily at any length, but sometime tonight. So I guess that will also come up. Yeah,
Excellent.
tonight's topic, as in he will come up as a designer. Tonight's topic, or what we're going to do, is it's a natural end of a trilogy. We did a sort of general introduction to classic gaming, classic fantasy, and then we've been doing a trio on the 3 types of adventure, if you want to think about it like that, that Gary talks about. Um, is the actual reference to city adventures as city adventures in the PHB?
You'll
But yeah,
find a little bit in the
yes, he does.
DMG.
That's the PHB page 101. He does talk about it a bit in the DMG too, but yeah, he talks about dungeon expeditions, outdoor exploration, and town adventures. These are the kind of presumed spheres of classic D&D. So that is we did dungeon adventures, and I think we tried to. Lynch, I thought you were busy. Lynch was claiming he was busy and wasn't going to turn up. He was like, "Oh, sorry, I'm washing my hair tonight in the one Irish bath."
Okay, little post-colonial resentment
Yeah,
there. Very
yeah,
nice.
yeah. I'm part Irish.
Mm,
Not from the same part. I don't
I
think I'm
could
from the same
tell.
part as
Yeah.
Lynch. Yeah, yeah. I've sublimated all my Celtic background
Yeah. You're
into
holding
the
it in right now. Yeah.
colonial colonist. When you find out, you're like, oh yeah, like who are all these people who went and like colonized America or Canada or India, and you're like, oh, they're all Irish and Scottish. Uh, so yeah, the adventure. Uh, I'll read from Gary. Let's just do this as a bit of a starter for 10, because I think we probably need to start. I don't know if I dropped the list for you. I've got a topic list. We'll find out if you can behave and follow it without knowing what it is. But where we need to define what a city adventure is, partly because this came up with wilderness adventure. Everyone knows what a dungeon adventure is. You go into a dungeon. There's a dungeon there, and it might be a crypt, it might be a monster lair.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh,
I would say like city adventures. Oh, I you can read first if you
yeah,
want to.
yeah.
But
But no, I was going to say I'll read first. But I think defining what it is. Where wilderness took a bit of defining because there are 2 types of thing that happen in the wilderness. I think we agreed. So yeah, Gary says in general, when you go on an adventure, you and in all probability one or more other characters will go to explore some underground labyrinth or area of land outdoors. The DM will have a map. This is saying to players. Then he says about dungeon expeditions, adventures into the underworld mazes are the most popular. The party equips itself, etc. Outdoor exploration, adventuring into unknown lands or howling wilderness, island is extremely perilous at best for large bands of men, and worse might roam the area. Forays of limited duration are possible even for characters new to adventure, etc. And then we get town adventure. Cities, towns, and sometimes even large villages provide the setting for highly interesting, informative, and often hazardous affairs and incidents. Even becoming an active character in a campaign typically requires interaction with the populace of the habitation, locating quarters, buying supplies and equipment, seeking information. These same activities in a completely strange town require forethought and skill. Care must be taken in all one says and does. Questions about rank, profession, god, and alignment are perilous, and use of an alignment tongue is socially repulsive in most places. There are usually beggars, bandits, and drunks to be dealt with, greedy and grasping merchants and informants to do business with, inquiring officials or suspicious guards to be answered. The taverns house many potential helpful or useful characters, but they also contain clever and dangerous adversaries. Then there are the unlit streets and alleys of the city after dark, and what lies in wait in the deserted ruins of some lost ancient city. Meat and drink for the doughty advanced D&D.
Indeed.
So that is his
Oh,
summary. I'm not sure if it's actually not to slur the sainted Gary, but it's not. It is not his clearest passage. It's clear what he's saying, but when he says these three types of adventure, I think that is the least clear of the three about what is going to happen mechanically and structurally in a city adventure. I would say.
well, yeah, I was going to say it's the least clear in many ways, right? Like there's a
Yeah.
very clear format for dungeons, and there's even a
Mm,
there's quite a clear format for for wilderness adventures as well.
mm.
But to me, like city adventures, I think a lot of people, myself included, like we've all had city adventures because we've all had adventuring or
Adventures in
hijinks
city.
going on
Yeah.
in cities. But this is
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
I feel the format is far less defined, so it's more like a
Mm.
sort of umbrella term uh, for a bunch of like adventures that can be completely different, from some sort of mystery or intrigue to, well, what is essentially what's going to be a point crawl, or even a little bit of investigation followed by
Yeah.
a sort of spec ops type of like lair assault, or it can be all of
Yeah.
these things.
And yeah, certainly my experience of this is so there's some cart before horse here, but certainly my experience of running city adventures, doing stuff in cities with my characters is something like that. It goes across that whole spectrum of things that can happen. And I guess there's a slightly I mentioned this. I don't think it's actually um, on the title, but also city supplements. There's a slightly different role for a city supplement strictly to a city adventure. Yeah, Grutzy, I think you're right that yeah, it's not that dungeon and wilderness adventures happen in dungeons and wilderness and city adventures happen in cities. It probably is very slightly more complex, and we have some prompts about that actually. Like there's some stuff around that. Uh, Gus is in the chat. Hi, Gus. We did mention Gus and who's also in the chat. We did mention classic adventure gaming episode 2. So those guys are in it. Their comments may alienate you entirely from the idea of listening to their podcast, but that's fair. I mean, if you can put up with Prince, I guess you can put up with them.
With anyone is what you're saying.
Anyone, yeah. Yeah, you're like exposure therapy for
That's
human
right, for
annoyance.
the whole internet. Yeah, for the human
Yeah,
race.
yeah. Yeah, the Dutch Defense Department actually have him as their main adversary training device.
That's true.
So, yeah, the city. What I think his let's propose a definition of city adventure, just to further us along the process, and this helps us distinguish it from a city supplement too, because I think one thing is if every book that is about a city or every book that includes a city or town or whatever is a city adventure, then kind of as I think Grutzy implies, it becomes overbroad. It's that you can't design it. You're like, well, is the price list part of the city adventure? I think it's that a city adventure is part of the normal gameplay cycle of players going, finding out stuff, getting treasure, defeating enemies, making friends, etc. There'll be differences, but it's that happening in a way that is informed by being in a conurbation in a civilized place rather than in an alien and oppositional place. I think that's I want to say that an adventure still has to have the normal meaning of the word adventure. It has to be like, yes, these are the things that happen that are Fafford and the Grey Mouser doing stuff in Lankmar. It's not them just buying a hat. It's when they are, having to sneak around doing stuff or investigate. That's the city adventure, I think.
Well, it should be also ideally it should be a little bit more than what is it? Yeah, your um your pocket gets picked, right?
Yeah.
You chase
Yeah.
down the ruffian and then you beat the stuffing out of him, right?
Yeah.
It's,
Which
that's
I mean, I
like
guess
that would be a single encounter. I guess
yeah.
an
That's the
adventure
thing
in
is
a
that is
city
not
would
an
have an
adventure.
objective.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the idea of objective with a player set or objective set, like someone says, here's an objective, whatever it is, like in the same way that going to a dungeon has an objective, either you want to go and loot the ruins you've heard about, or there's orcs there that you're being paid, at 15 gold per head of orc you bring back, something like that. Like there's a reason you go and do it. And in the city, just sitting in your squalid living condition, like your quarters at the DOS house, that is not a city adventure. That is just being in a city. So I guess let's distinguish and say the city supplement can contain all these things, including adventures, but the adventure is the gameplay activity based on a module or not, or whatever else that is, has an objective and involves playing D&D. It involves kind of using your characters, using the knowledge you have of playing D&D to succeed.
That sounds workable to me so far. Let's go for it.
Yeah. I'm actually going to start before we go anywhere else, just because it's probably the most famous, and we did get a question. I think Ken asked this question. Why hasn't CSIO ever been bettered? CSIO is City State of the Invincible Overlord by Bob Bledsoe, and not me, Owen. What was his name? Bill Owen. Which here it is.
Is that that's a revised one?
Very that's the revised. Yeah. Which is copyright 1977, reprinted 6th edition 1981. Distributed by Games Workshop in the UK, I think. So if you want to ring them up, find out if they've got any spare copies.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. They'd be like,
kind of interesting.
What we used to sell other games before trying to take over the entire world. But yeah,
somebody said
CSIO
it before, right?
is the most famous, isn't it? It's the most famous city supplement / city adventure / whatever. So why hasn't it ever been bettered?
A setting and that's like a whole. It kind of transcends any single adventure, right? It's more or less complete description of a city with just filled with pages and pages of like streets, NPCs, adventure hooks, opportunities for adventures, weird procedures, courtroom proceedings, you name it, right? It's there. Strange adversaries, etc., etc. It is kind of interesting that, as you said before, that like the very first city supplement got it exactly right, and no one else came close to it.
At least by reputation. We'll talk about some other examples hopefully over the course of this.
Sure,
but yeah,
as far as old school gaming, I think is concerned, right?
Yeah, there are relatively few other old products, and we can talk about some of them, but that are really considered to be as good, it's fair to say, anywhere near as good at describing a city to play D&D in.
Yes.
Now, it's interesting. It's something where what you could say about CSIO, at least the 6th edition, which is the one I have, is that it has it has a sort of oddity that it has some dungeon levels included, but not keyed.
Right.
And it has a lot of potential adventures. So it's a sort of proto city adventure in that way. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not a kind
not
of here
just
is a
one.
module to run in a city.
It's many dozens and dozens and dozens. Yeah, it's meant to be like even like a setting for adventure. It's like
exactly. It's sort
take
of
you many sessions before it's exhausted for sure.
It's a development beyond. Well, not development. It's an artifact beyond a city adventure. Suggests his definition: adventuring with social repercussions. Now the players have to show they've mastered the art of plausible deniability, indirect tactics, hide and seek, proxies, maneuver to employ direct action.
Yes.
Yeah.
And ideally, a city should have some sort of factions going on for sure.
Yeah, we have a question about that. So yeah, I think the idea that cities are living places and they're heavily social, so they are parallel. And again, we'll kind of touch on this if we talk about the city as a dungeon. They're parallel to the faction dungeon. You know, the factional dungeon where you're like, oh yes, there's there's kobolds this end and there's goblins this end, and they hate each other. Do you know a dungeon that's good at that actually is anomalous subsurface environment is very good at that kind of like there's lots of people to ally with or fight. And similarly in the city, it's that it uses that adventure structure except on steroids, because you can't just wander around kind of just killing stuff and maybe getting one bad factional, like you have lost reputation with this faction. It is, oh no, then the overlord's soldier, his 7th level troubleshooter, captain of the guard, comes and murks you, basically.
Yeah, there's a difference there in how they respond, right? Usually with these factions in the dungeon, if one of them is very angry at you, you can go a level down, or even just stay in a different area of the dungeon, and there won't really be a problem so much. But with these factions, the idea is that, like, if you're on their shit list and you don't take any steps to conceal yourself, that they'll actually go, they'll come out and find you, basically.
Yeah.
You don't want to have to look. Their range of action can be areas.
This is the start
segments
of
the entire
Swords of
town.
Lankmar. This is the start of Swords of Lankmar, where Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser return and find every single person they owe money to, every single person they've offended or pranked, and the pimps of prostitutes they've tried to reform, and then, or Fafhrd has tried to reform and then have abandoned, are all there to beat them up when they enter the city, and the city guard is all scrupulously facing the other way.
Yes,
So
right.
basically, the consequences of screwing up in a city are, it's hard to get away. Grutzi also says, and I think this is helpful, they've got a special component of PCs being invested and established, like the town is not just a one-off thing, the characters are at least a small part of it. The dungeon is especially in the Mythic Underworld version, is somewhere else, isn't it? You don't live there. I suppose in a few ruin kind of situations, you might make it into a stronghold, but generally, you go there, you clear it out, you leave. Whereas the city is, and this connects to your point, Prince, the city is somewhere where whatever happens is part of your life. If you, I think Tony Huso talked about this in a campaign diary kind of discussion about their home city, the player's home city, in his first big new AD&D campaign, how it's been taken over by the Witches' Council or whatever from another city, because they just don't care. The PCs were not invested in that side of it, so the city changed, and that has consequences for them. It's not immediately fatal, but it's not as good as it could have been, because the players did not respond to an emergent situation in the city, and they live there. So
Right, and the idea is kind of that you if you adventure there for a very long time, that you form various contacts. I guess it's no different than even if you just use like a random inn somewhere in a tiny village, which I'm a little bit more partial to like more remote areas. But I've also had we've had adventures in cities for sure, right? But the idea is also that you kind of like build up contacts. There's NPCs that you're like more familiar with that the DM can then use to maybe use that as a springboard for adventure. They're gonna sell the inn. The innkeeper has huge gambling debts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You gotta help out, all this stuff, right?
Yeah, this actually does connect, and I guess our next episode might be on campaigns and how they're fake and no one actually plays a campaign. But there is a thing here about the campaign and the game as something beyond just the dungeon dynamic of you go and explore, you roll the dice, you go and explore, you battle something, that kind of thing. How the campaign is this sort of tentacled being it kind of worms its way into the character's life everywhere, and which creates interest for the player, and therefore creates new kinds of adventure, because the players care about the world, the secondary fiction they're invested in, the secondary world they're invested in.
I would say so as an artifact of their downtime, right? Even if they go into the mega dungeon that's in the center of town, and then they go out again to whatever, identify their magic items, or rest up at the inn.
They're going to have some investment in the place they're in. If you go to
the same place multiple times. Yeah. So it's an opportunity for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say good examples of that, which we can kind of, we'll touch on here. I think it's worth saying that there's some campaigns that have this interesting dynamic where there's really only two places. One is the tavern and the wizard in his tower, and the other is the mega dungeon. And so I'm thinking about Undermountain is literally the most famous version of that. Undermountain, which we've talked about this before, Prince, which Ed Greenwood had this incredibly detailed, like 10-level map, and Wizards were like, yeah, we don't want to use your maps because they're too complicated. So can you use these other maps from the artist's campaign, and can you just like partly key them? And then and he was like, oh my,
Can
not
you
Wizards,
write
CSR.
very long
Yeah,
keys for every?
then it's not even it's not even that bad for that comparatively. It's just you're like, and it's not
No,
even a bad
I've heard
supplement.
I've heard that it was
Undermountain's
okay for
okay,
sure.
but you're just like,
Yeah.
can you imagine being Lorraine is just sitting there like eating someone whilst saying, "No, Ed, you must write more Elminster's ecologies and not actually publish Undermountain."
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
but yeah, but the other is Castle Sinterland by Gabor Lux. They're both Zintalan is a better product. They're both worth looking at. But Zintalan obviously has that dynamic of there's not really a wilderness. You can roll an encounter on the way, but like there's a mega dungeon or a mini mega dungeon, and then there's a town. And
oh,
the town does have stuff you can do in it. It does have things that you might get caught up in. So even in a mega dungeon campaign, like the town is necessarily
well,
the other
yeah, right.
pole
What's
of
your
the game.
the oldest example of like these sort of like starting towns would be that have stuff going on is like B2 or T1, right? And
Yeah,
that's actually still
yeah.
a template that I don't see replicated that often. But it's pretty good. It's just this idea of like, well, even in the starting town,
Mm.
there might be a spy for the monsters, or there might be somebody with a hidden agenda that's more than they seem. There might be some concealed
Yeah.
treasure, that sort of stuff. Yeah, but you
Oh
don't
yeah, I think that's
interact
the
with it
yeah, indeed. Yeah, yeah.
in the same way you would do with a dungeon. I feel it's more like
Yeah,
free
so that's
form.
an interesting thing. B2, that's a good distinction that maybe goes back to ease, its adventuring with social repercussions, but also Grutzi's is something which you have an investment in at the keep. So we're gonna spoiler a 45-year-old adventure. Okay, you need to log off and you need to go and play D&D if this is a spoiler.
For
For a
B2,
45-year, yeah, B2, yeah, is
I
that
think
the
we can spoil
obviously the
that.
cleric is evil. The kindly fortress cleric is evil, and that's something you could find out, and you might confront him, and that would be a battle in the city. You know, if you fight him, it's going to be a battle in the city. Um,
I disagree. This is you find this out when he accompanies you. He's like, no,
mm,
no, you don't have to pay me. I'll go for free. I'll
yeah,
bring
yeah,
like
and
two
he
max
can
hit
betray you.
point
He'll betray you. Yeah, yeah,
retainers, and yeah, I'll
yeah,
attack you in the rear for sure.
yeah. But I
But
think
yeah,
that's the yeah,
you can unmask him. That's actually
yeah. That's
my
that's what I mean. As in the idea that you're like, but if imagine you found out in some way or had a suspicion in some way in that kind of situation before you really had hard evidence. Do you confront the guy? Do you just fight him in the middle of the street? And of course,
then
that's part
no,
of that
then you do
city
some
adventure. Yeah,
skullduggery, right? Then
yeah,
yeah,
exactly,
then the
exactly. Yeah,
thief gets into his own. Maybe you break into
yeah.
his house to look for an
Mhm,
evil holy symbol, or you tail him, right?
mhm.
But I feel that's the kind of like on the one hand the challenge, but also the interesting part of like the city adventure that you kind of you have to be able to sort of account for that as well. It's a little bit like the
Yeah,
wilderness adventure that you have to be able to fly by the seat of your pants. Is that the
yeah,
right expression? It might be a little bit
yeah.
more.
I think yeah, they're both much more emergent than the dungeon. Like by that, what I mean is the dungeon has emergent components, but the dungeon should be, in terms of a module you've bought, it should be a complete adventure where it describes all the places, it manages most possible repercussions. You know, if players try to mess around with this artifact, like in Stonehell, if they mess around with this and fix it, the terraforming device launches its way up to the surface and starts terraforming the world.
Yeah,
You know, like
or
that's
even
yeah,
simpler, right? The room just
yeah,
has it says okay, there's a table here, four chairs, there's a cupboard, and like some other stuff.
yeah.
Like it's actually
Yeah,
very definite. That's right.
yeah, it's and what I'm saying that the emergent properties often are covered in a play tested dungeon. The most obvious ones are done. Whereas in a city with 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 people, you just can't do that. So there's all these things the player is going to be like, can we do this? And if you are not happy to do that as a DM, you're going to be like, no, there are no shops apart from the general store. Right? You know, like
Well,
it's going to be incredibly constrained.
you asked but why I think it's interesting to bring up the one exception, right? To because most
Hmm.
of these city materials they do
Yeah.
abstract it. You might get some districts, some major features, but then everything else
Mm.
is just kind of kept very
Mm.
open. in general.
Yeah.
But I guess the one that does it totally differently is actually City State of the Invisible
Yeah.
Overlord, which has just a level of granularity and
Yeah.
detail that's
It
unprecedented.
does.
So
I will put up the. It's actually it's only single column, so there is a weird thing where it's maybe hard to compare to if you had a TSR layout editor from 1979 at a point where they're very space efficient. You can see that like an entry is a short para, right? So generally speaking, the seal maker, Nervi Bnaznoth, class magic user, neutral level 5, 12 HP, 9 AC, etc., etc. And then Brazos doubles his income by heading a secret coven of witches within the city. As Warlock, this sounds like a very exploitative role, doesn't it? I am the Warlock of the witches. He receives gifts totaling 280 GP per month in addition to his income from gold seals, 160 GP, silver seals, 70 GP. This is each, I guess, and wooden seals, 15 GP. Invisible in his room, 16 GP in trunk, guarded by a poisonous snake, class 4 HP, 1 AC 6, 12 CP, 34 SP in box. So, yeah,
and so on.
that yeah. So that is a single entry, and there is an adventure there. Like, in fact, there's two adventures there. This is the mad thing here. Is it's in terms of I'm not saying Bob Bledsaw got pregnant, but Bledsaw pregnancy is the same with Wilderlands, where you're like, in this hex there are 18 things you can do. Here is half a word on each of them, and somehow it works. There is this is maybe the threading the needle of being incredibly spare with words. You know, being very, very, very limited in word count, whilst
Well,
also, yeah.
no, part of that maybe, right, but I think somehow, right, Bledsaw has a gift or an understanding of like describing situations that have sort of like this potential to them,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've seen it done wrong as well. If
Hmm.
you can look at what is it, Isle of the Unknown by Geoffrey
Hmm.
McKinney, I think is the one I usually use for an example of an adventure that it had a bunch of like strange wizards on this sort of mysterious isle full of bizarre magical statues, which is a reference to Wilderlands, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
the wizards, they only have strange powers. It's not really, when you read that, you're like, well, what do I do with this? And maybe if you're particularly creative, you might be able to, if you strain your imagination, might be
Hmm.
able to figure something out. But here, with Bledsaw and with Wilderlands, sorry, with City State, you can just
Yeah.
go down the list, and usually the details that are described it's something that's going to be, it's going to come up during play, or it's something that the players can get some use out of, even if it is only to just rob the motherfucker, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the seal maker Nervi Bnazoth, who is literally the first entry. Oh no, he's not, because Barter Street. I've been screwed by the page fault. Barter Street has two locations, which you can be surrounded by street urchins. This is the thing that for encounters, he's just like the encounter is something ridiculous and annoying, and you just roll a percentage.
But that's
Um,
perfect.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I-
We'll
I-
talk about. Well, maybe we should talk about encounters in a bit. But yeah, like he keeps it simple. So there is a procedure. You roll, you see if that happens, and then
well,
you go to a location.
yes, and it's true. He does
Hmm.
keep it simple, which I think in, well, I mean, I guess because the Wilderlands is so sorry, the city state is so well described, it's actually
Hmm.
not that difficult to figure out how quickly everybody is moving. Uh, but
Yeah,
at the same time, yeah, just a flat percentage chance. Still
yeah.
attaching some sort of cost to movement, and sometimes it is like, okay, whatever, you get blocked by whatever somebody throws. I'm not sure if that one is in city state, but somebody throws whatever, empties
Mm.
their chamber pots under a window that you're standing under. But I do happen
Yeah,
to know that there's one where it's like, okay, if you're here at night, you have a 20% chance of getting attacked by werewolves, right? So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not always like uh,
Oh
inconsequential.
no, yeah, yeah. No, indeed. No, I do think that kind of this is a separate thing of just about general module writing skill is like the perfect middle ground is you can describe an entire like idea in a short sentence. You know, obviously, compression with evocation. And it is a hard thing. I think what you find is and it's more prone in OSR things because in trad products, including the good ones, the problem you tend to find is you use a lot of words to describe it so that you get all the stuff, but then you realize, the amount of information given to you is very little.
What the
Whereas
problem
in,
is,
yeah,
I think with trad products, and the excessive wordiness feeds
yeah,
into it. the problem is that we all have these there's these exciting moments to RPGs, right? Like the
Hmm.
heroic sacrifice or the betrayal, or that all this very exciting stuff that can come like naturally from the game. And they figured out, okay, a lot of people get a lot of like sort of dramatic satisfaction from that, so we should force that. That's the
Mm.
problem with I think with trad games in general. And yeah, the excessive wordiness all, what is it,
Mm.
it all funnels into that.
Yeah.
Right.
So you get a long piece of description that tells you a lot of stories about stuff that isn't going to happen to you, and there's no procedures for it to happen. Like it's just
Or
it's
it does
yeah,
it does happen, but it's not, you know it's not earned or organic. It
mm,
is
yeah.
forced. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think with city supplements specifically, I think what you end up with is often a lot of description about the people there, the people who, yeah, but not like they're a warlock running a witch's coven. They meet here, they do this, but like rather just like, oh, this is their background.
Just
There's no hooks associated with the background. It's just a story about them.
a
He,
story about a
yeah,
boring asshole. Yeah.
yeah.
The
So it's
I,
yeah,
I thought about that, and I kind of want to pick your brain on that. So,
yeah.
like my ideal amount of backstory for most NPCs, this should be
Backstory.
between a well, you've got a let's say you've got an innkeeper or something.
Mm,
You have in your
yeah.
mind, if the players are going to interact with that innkeeper once, then, or like whatever, 3 times, then you can think, fuck it,
Hmm.
okay, he has a
Yeah.
oh, sorry, I should swear less. But he has a hook hand. That's his interesting or noteworthy feature, and then we're done. Where is he from? He's from the town that the inn is in. Okay, otherwise,
Yeah.
go away. But I mean, I guess you can sort of you can afford to put a little bit more thought into NPCs that are highly unusual, that your players are more likely to interact with. And if you
Hmm.
start
Yeah.
dipping into the extremely non old school concept of the campaign wide villain, then I understand that
Mm.
you're gonna go like, okay, this guy has a little bit more of a
Yeah,
backstory.
I was going to say, it's if you want to have some sort of like, you need NPCs who aren't just there to interact with in fairly practical terms, but you kind of need to know. Though even there, of course, campaign villains are usually described badly in products that have them. Not always, but because what you actually need is things they do. That you need, like they should basically description should be verbal. I should be doing words. It should be they will do this. They care about
It should
this.
be
Yeah,
potential. I agree
yeah,
with
yeah,
that,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I also think that, yeah,
yeah.
that's the whole the power of old school gaming. I think is that
Mm,
instead of investing a lot of time and effort and description on, a few sort of key pieces, and then bending and twisting the entire game, so no matter what happens, those pieces will get used. Instead, you with old school gaming, you have hundreds and hundreds of pieces, so it's like
mm,
it's fine if something doesn't work out precisely the
yeah.
way that you had envisioned. It's okay if Lareth the Beautiful gets I don't know, a sleep spell on his face. I think you can sleep Lareth the Beautiful. I'm not sure, but if he gets a sleep spell before you take him out.
I'm gonna let's check.
He's fourth
Uh,
level, I think.
yeah,
He might
if
be
he is,
fifth. Ooh,
yeah, if he's fourth, then you can. Um, Lareth the Beautiful. He's a fifth level cleric. You cannot sleep
yeah,
him.
there we go.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. And is that does he get a save to color spray, or is he immune to color spray? Uh,
Well, we'll think
yeah,
about that. There's an
yeah.
answer for the chat, I'm
Answer that
sure.
in the comments.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Grutz says, yeah, you give lots of words so the DM runs it right. That is part. I think that's a part of it. I think it's also word count to meet a demand of players want description.
Well,
It's weird because
or
actually,
word
having read
word
lots of
count
these
because you're
products,
paid by the word.
yeah, yeah. But lots of this just
That's another one.
a lot of these a lot of this long description that you've been told the players like is often so badly written. It's one of the weird thing. One of the weird. Anyway, we'll focus more on the thing. Obviously we have been on relevant topics, but yeah. So yeah, I think this is an supplement because it is not. This is not in fact an adventure. It has adventurable things in it, but rather it's just millions of adventures. Yeah, E says use command. I think there are other things which look more like adventures in a city. I just reviewed this on the channel. I don't know if you have read it. Lankmar City of Adventure, first edition.
I've never dipped into AD&D Lankmar.
Yeah, no.
Should I?
This
Or
I think so. So I think so. This at least, I think some of it has a pretty mixed reputation. But this is of all people, it's by Niles, Ralston, and Naismith. I mean, Niles is good. It's by a very workaday trio. The second edition has some really useful things that this just misses out because obviously there were editing problems. Like there's not an encounter table, which is a problem. But it also has some slight downgrades. It's
Well,
slightly different. I
what I'm
would,
interested in,
yeah.
so this City of Lankmar, right?
Yeah.
Is this a so this I assume is not any single adventure, but also like a setting for adventure.
Both and it has an
Yeah,
adventure, which I was going to mention. It is
sure.
1985. It is kind of at the very end of the glory days. So the things it has lots of things, but it does have an adventure, and the adventure is a heist. So
Well,
a
that makes
city
sense.
event,
No,
yeah,
but
yeah,
what I was going to ask is
yeah.
like, does it offer any sort of like, I guess, sort of a format for
Mm,
or
mm,
does it assume a certain format? Or the play? What do the players do between adventures? Do they just drink in the inn? Do they explore the town? That's
mm,
kind of like the that's what I'm interested in, because I don't think that there's ever been a even in the OSR there hasn't really been
mm,
a way to, or sorry, nobody's really tried to sort of tackle it in a really in a systematic manner where they were like, okay, let's nail it down. This is how we city adventure,
yeah.
which I guess makes sense if it's just a sort of like grab bag of all of these different types of
So,
things
I
that
mean,
can happen in
Ben
the city.
Lawrence does have. This is actually the one Zion book. This is the latest Zion book, and I did get it, and I've glanced through it, but I haven't properly read it. I
Hmm.
have the rest of the Zion adventures I've read, and I've got a review up, and they are very good. Zion is very good, but called Downtime in Zion, and a lot of it is to do with it's a little bit I don't know Forge-esque in terms of kind of mechanic. I mean, yeah, as in using mechanics with fairly fixed boundaries to kind of generate story conclusions. So you see that in a lot of, I mean, it's literally a story game kind of format. But it does
Ooh.
do some like, oh, if players want to develop this, they do this, they roll this, they generate this. This is the dice recording method, that sort of thing.
Okay, so there's like
Um,
something to it. Yeah, I've seen
yeah,
toolkits plenty, but
yeah.
just
Jeff mentions the toolkit, backswords and bucklers, job generator. So the idea that
hell
there
yeah.
is that I suppose it's, I say having, how do I run city adventures? And I've actually on the channel, a couple of the streams are, you could say city adventure like. So the Spelljammer adventure we ran on stream, um, the one that we ran on stream, and we'll be back in Spelljammer soon, I think. But that was a city adventure. It wasn't out in space. It was in Brawl, and it was an investigation, and that just meant wandering around, going and talking to people, sneaking into places, trying to do that kind of thing. And then the other one, in Dark Sun, similarly, is, I think it's, I'm not sure, between times I've been like, oh, this is the mechanic for how you go to the inn and drink. I think what I tend to do is, there's encounters if you're outside, you have to pay living expenses, or encounter chance if you're outside, there are living expenses to pay, and you can generate rumors under certain circumstances. That's probably my between adventures kind of city mechanic.
Well, I've had these little sort of like, I guess the best description is like jaunts that my players did
Hmm.
in between
Hmm.
adventuring, where they apropos of nothing tried to rob an
Yeah,
alchemist.
yeah,
This backfired catastrophically. Well, actually,
good.
they're pretty smart. They started some sort of fire in his shop, and then stole his strong box while he was trying to put it out. But then, of course, the strong box had a poisoned needle trap in it, and the fire that they had started that really did not put him uh, on the right side of the alchemist guild. So that
Yeah.
it basically, I didn't really have a format in mind
Mm,
when I did it, but it sort of developed naturally, that I was like, okay, well, they wouldn't be disguised. They weren't wearing any disguises when they robbed this man in broad daylight. So I
mm,
guess the alchemist guild would definitely put a price on their head now. So then they had to get away from assassins, right? And then it turned into a game of like, okay, well, that there's several assassins are basically behind you, following your description. This is something that they had figured out just by, I think, talking to some people. So then the adventure becomes, okay, how do you get rid of this? Do you just ride to the other side of the duchy and hope that they'll just give up, or are you gonna try to put disguise yourself, maybe ambush them, something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a thing there that obviously, again, there's the DM as the Gygaxian master who has to be like, I will react to the situation, rather than like, this is your reputation system where, and reputation systems aren't bad necessarily, but I mean, when you're like everything is mechanized down to the nth degree, I think like probably both of us are describing, at least in our praxis, we are both like, oh yeah, you react to the emerging situation by this, or the players are interested in this, and so they look into this.
I
So, in
think
fact, for Dark Sun, the way that adventure that was generated, the one that is currently running, we're pausing it to play Council of Worms while players are away. But the way it happened was there's a random encounter, and with a a veiled alliance member made contact with their preserver in the party, and was like, oh yeah, there's like a magic item smuggling going on. We'd like, we should interfere with it and stop defilers and sorcerer kings getting stuff. Yeah. And then the preserver had to sell this to the rest of the party as like police action, and then they had to investigate it and get clues on it and stuff. So again, it kind of just emerged in that case from an encounter, but it was just, I think, in the strict sense, in a broad sense, roleplay driven, like both character sheet and character motivations and player motivations. Fiendish DM does say City of Sanctuary is good. Sorry, Prince, you go.
Well, I was going to say, I think so. I also, even in I'm trying to think back. I've had other even in Carcosa. I've just had like there were more like, I guess you don't really have many cities in Carcosa, but you have towns and villages, right, full of degenerate primitives. But you
Holland.
know, right, something like Belgium.
Yeah.
But it kind of it really does feel like more free flowing there. For example, they came past this. There was basically a river that had a little bit of trade going up and down, and one village was built across the river, and essentially with a series of dams, just asked toll from both sides, and was incredibly rich. And of course, they had some sort of pit fighting scene where you would fight on all of these poles suspended above the water with sea monsters in the water, all of that stuff. So. And it was just like something. It was offhandedly mentioned, while they were in the inn. Some merchant is like, "Hey, you wanna bet on
Yeah.
that?" And so then they bet all of their money. They had like 2,000 gold. They bet all of it. I was like, okay, I've got a character with 18 dexterity. They said like, I'll fight this pit fighting champion of yours, and they made no attempt to cheat whatsoever. I had hoped that I had given enough hints that they would maybe try to like, you know, pull a fast one and clearly
Yeah.
sabotage the match and cheat as the other guy had done, right? So during the
Yeah.
fight, there was a guy on the rooftop shining the sun in his eyes, and another guy in the crowd who threw a poisoned knife and all of that stuff. But what I'm getting at here is that I don't think I have like a sort of like fixed format for all of these city adventures, because
Yeah.
it kind of feels like first of all, it feels very side tracky, right, and
Yeah.
episodic to me.
Yeah.
But I can
Yeah.
imagine if you have a campaign set in a city, you are going to have to figure out some sort of standard format sooner rather than later.
Yeah. I mean, there's the resources in the Lankmar book. These are the interesting things about this. One of which is removed, and the other which is altered in the second edition, which is a shame. There's just an adventure, 2 pages, 4 columns, which is just a key for this place. You hear a rumor. It has some order of battle stuff. It has loot in particular rooms. Kind of exactly what you expect. It also includes a black wizard and his familiar who are coming. Also coming to try to steal it at the same time as you. So there's that.
Yeah, perfect.
And then the other thing is it has a booklet of geomorphs, and so it has a few things. Geomorphs for when they go into the back streets, you just generate where they turn up and where they look. And then it also has building floor plans for with randomly generated tables for buildings they can enter. So if they break
Oh,
in somewhere,
damn.
it
Okay.
has
Can you
yeah,
do you how do you generate the floor plans? Do you just roll a
so
d6, and is it
you
is it that many
you
rooms?
roll you generate the building purpose with which is a d20, is a D20 table, but with 35 up to 35, because you can have a modifier based on your
Right.
district. That then points you to a subtable. Either you use the building itself, the building plan itself from the other ones, or you go to a subtable for what's in there, and then there is a floor plan modifier, which points you to one of the 17 floor plans, depending on modifier for district or for
That you
purpose.
can
Sorry,
so like you've got
yeah,
like 17 different floor plans that you
yeah. So
that's actually
there are some.
quite robust.
There are
How
some.
often do you think you would you know uh, actually
I feel
17
like
is quite a bit before you get to the point where you would repeat it actually if
yeah.
you're a little
Well,
strategic with that as well.
yeah,
Yeah,
I was
it's
going
like
to say, as long as you're
huge.
careful, you rotate them, you alter them slightly as you go, so you
And
don't,
these are random
you know,
floor plans, right? So
yeah, there's
yeah,
seven,
no,
yeah,
this
yeah.
is pretty robust. Oh,
No,
very
no,
good.
it's a serious game. Like, as in, it's a serious supplement, genuinely. I would say. But yes, so obviously Jeff was saying above he liked it. I'll just get some comments up from because he's dropped a couple. He's talking about city adventures and why there are fewer good ones, and he says basically partly it's because social adventures fit into the world that actually exists. They are not like a drop in; they are something which is based on relationship, and this kind of connects to your point about the Alchemist Guild or whatever. Um, he
Eh,
then says a low level new arrival adventure, or those ones where you're like, oh, you don't know anything about the city, but you could do this. That makes sense. I don't know what you think, but there's probably some truth there that the city adventure is an artifact of a developed campaign, and there have only been about 200 developed campaigns ever, maybe like or something like that. I'm kind of
There
joking,
has
but I'm
never
also kind
been
of
a
not.
developed campaign. I'm
That you
reliably
cannot develop a
informed.
campaign.
It's just a
Campaigns are
sort of,
fake.
if you try to imagine it, you instead get a sort of blank void. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
no. Of course it is. I kind of agree with that. That yeah, it is something that you um well, even sometimes your players will just surprise you and go to like some
Mm,
place on the map that you barely thought about, and then you go and you look in your gazetteer and you're like, oh shit, it's giving me nothing. Two sentences. Oh my god! So you have to
yeah, yeah,
quickly spin something out of your ass based on Jack Vance and get
yeah,
him
yeah,
embroiled in some sort of scam. Yeah, that's
yeah, yeah.
great, right? But no, I agree that it feels like it's a more sort of like free flowing format. And then obviously if they spend a long time in the city, then you can do your murder mystery. Let's talk about that later, by the way, the murder mystery, because
Mm,
I feel that
yeah.
there's a conception that it doesn't quite work in D&D that I want to discuss. But before we do
I
that,
don't
I
think
will
that's
finish
true,
this
but yeah,
sentence, which will take me 20 more minutes.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
I was going to say the it's no, I lost my train of thought. Whatever, it doesn't matter. So mystery adventures. Yeah. Um, I think there's a problem there. Yeah, Bryce Lynch talks a lot about this. I can already hear the chat hissing angrily, but it is true that mysteries in D&D are made kind of difficult
Hmm.
because of abilities like the paladins detect evil, no alignment, locate object,
Mm,
ESP. You name it. Even at lower levels, there's a lot of ways to sort
mm,
of circumvent
yeah, yeah,
all of this stuff, and then the solution is usually to uh, give, you have to kill in a city adventure everybody with an amulet that's clearly visible. You have to kill them. That's an amulet of protection from detection and location. You have to
yeah.
off them. What's your take on that?
Um, yeah. I mean, I've run in terms of straight mystery as opposed to investigation is broader, right? Because
Yeah,
investigation can be like, where have the kidnapped victims been hidden? You're like, well, that's lots of stuff.
we do
But I think,
locate person, or like what is it?
yeah,
We cast augury. We do
yeah,
ESP. We do speak with
yeah.
dead with the corpse we find. Like all of you've
So
got
I
all of
mean,
this this
obviously,
shit. Yeah,
one thing is that it's probably fine to just so what I generally say is aim adventures at the right level. So if it's a seventh level adventure, like your party seventh level, and you're just thinking what could be a cool thing to happen soon, then you need to
yeah,
come up with NPC opponents who can do stuff that will screw the players, not be like they can't do anything to stop. But yeah, to some degree, you got to let players generally don't gimp players. Generally, want to let players be good at stuff. By saying, I think I've run one normal kind of 3 clue adventure, like crime mystery, which was you'll hate this, but it was on Eberron. It was a one shot. It was actually, I think it's quite a good adventure. I could probably improve it now, but I'm like, oh yeah, it basically had a clear format where players can investigate in different directions and they could come up with the clues if they made the effort. And it was the police captain was the guy who had murdered, was the murderer, that kind of thing.
He was running an illegal Warforged prostitution ring in his
Yeah.
in his
No,
basement. Yeah.
oh no, this was all. It's all about like shards, dragon shards being hidden inside sculptures. I named it after the Maltese
Oh,
Falcon.
that is some pulp story for sure.
Yeah.
And it would be right.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Oh no,
Yeah.
Eberron, basically Eberron is not lame if it's city adventures and they're
No, I
noir.
know.
Everything else is kind of annoying or becomes annoying fairly quickly. But Eberron does have a really good setting for that kind of sense of like noir city.
Yeah,
But
it's
yes,
pulp writing, and I don't mean like I mean the pulp tales as in the the adventure, the lad mags, the adventure tales, and the noir instead of Conan.
Jeff says it flippantly, but of course, if the mystery you're investigating is in a heavily evil city, that kind of like does twist that a bit, doesn't it? 'Cause you're like, well, yeah, great, you found out you're in what is the capital of the Great Kingdom? You're in the Great Kingdom with
Of
diplomatic
Eredi.
papers. You're indeed you're investigating, and like what 3/4 of the nobles are evil. So what are you going to do? He's evil. Kill him.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
so that's fair, right? And then they're
Yeah,
just like,
that is a
hey, what do
fix.
but if you take that to a logical extreme, so I've seen mystery adventures where they kind of work, but then it's always like, well, this guy, even though he's the murderer, he's actually neutral, and then actually they disguised themselves before they killed the guy. So if you cast Speak with Dead on him, you'll get a false. So basically it becomes a sort of
No, the latter is good. The former is lame, or at least it could happen sometimes. But the latter is good because that is
but this is a
D&D
slippery
thinking.
slope.
I agree.
Yeah. It is interesting, of course. Yeah, that's a.
But the point is that the mystery adventure is a rare adventure. It's not something you're like, oh, we play this every like each of these takes 2 sessions, or like, and we play it every second adventure is a mystery adventure. It become annoying that people would come up with, or at least unless you want to play Poirot in fantasy, it's going to be annoying because people are going to come up with more and more elaborate ways of avoiding spells. But as a one-off, I think that's quite clever. And if the players realize this, imagine the players being like, the kinds of evidence we need to be a lot more creative about getting.
But then you don't want to go with like what is it? I feel the mystery. The problem there is that the format is sort of anachronistic, and it's kind of close to Ren Fair very often, where it's like, there he is, officer, I saw him, and all right, take him away. And it's not adventurers that kind of it should be more of if you're going to do a mystery, this should be like a Warhammer Fantasy or Dark Heresy mystery, where in the end there's some giant sword fighting smackdown with a cult in a warehouse, and then underneath the warehouse there's a temple of Baphomet, right?
Oh yeah, and that is kind of part of it. Is you kind of think that D&D should end in fighting people. Not always, but like there's or at least it should end in sending them to sleep. It should end in crisis, not in like
There he is. I knew it. You gather all of the suspects together in a room, and then you reveal how you knew they did it.
Yeah. I mean, I would say again, let's say
on your maid. Little did you know that I didn't cast it on you, for you always wear a potion of ESP. So you always have an amulet,
a medallion of protection
since
from
you were
ESP,
attacked by doppelgangers. That was your excuse. But like I read the mind of your maid.
I would argue that as a one-off, that could be incredibly fun. Like as sprinkle on the cake. Like
give me the sword fight. Okay, it should be it's leading to this sort of this dilapidated house somewhere. The plague broke out there. It's been abandoned for a while. Oh, that's strange.
I generally agree. Like, and that is my practice. But I'm saying, like, I think as a sprinkle, like if the players as a Saturday night special, the fact that you have some kind of like something, and particularly if you are willing to make it as ridiculous, in a sense, you want to press into the genre silliness and be like, you're going with this like pacifist magic user, and he's an investigator.
Even here, by the way, this is
the way around. You escort him,
Yeah.
through a dungeon, through the urban dungeon, so that he can investigate the crime because he refuses to do stuff. And eventually he just like casts, I don't know,
I,
cuss spray on everyone. So they wake up and he gets to tell them, I've investigated everything and done this. I think that could be fun. Like, the point is, these are gimmick adventures, and gimmick adventures are 1 per 2 years, aren't they? You know,
oh,
they are like,
right.
they are,
Owen,
yeah.
do you think that it's
Mhm,
possible to run a mystery adventure without sort of um, well, actually, this is a two-part question. The first one is without sort of using your GM fiat to bend
mhm,
circumstance, so it's more exciting. And
mhm,
two, is it desirable if you
mhm.
could run it like sort of like straightforward? Here you go, you write a map key, uh, and it all runs like a clockwork. The DM need only react and interpret, right?
I mean, I think so. But I mean, I suppose it's all about weight because we're talking about mysteries as something which is.
Mysteries
I'll go through.
specifically.
Oh yeah, I'll go through his comments here because he does say some stuff. Detection spells have block spells, so there
I
is a
know.
degree of like, yeah. So that is a partial solution. Is your opponents have the same tools you do to some degree. Um, yeah. So yeah, and he usually calls it the mystery. This might be a useful thing to think. It partly also fits into the Saturday Night Special. The
Well,
mystery is the
oh,
urban puzzle.
I kind of want to
The
respond
mystery is
to
the urban puzzle dungeon. Yeah, please do.
oh
But
yeah, I
the
want to
mystery,
respond to
I think that's a good
EOTB, and
description.
this is
Yeah,
where this is kind of
yeah,
like where I played a lot of like Dark Heresy, which of course
yeah,
works with mysteries like this, and you see this a lot with these types of adventures in the early '90s. What they generally do or figured out how to do is if you're
yeah.
if it's a good mystery, then you either figure it out, or if you grind to a halt, that's kind of like when when the opponent is going to make a move,
Yeah,
right? Where
yeah,
when they try to take you out, so oh, and then you have a trail again, so you can kind of keep
yeah.
going, and that's
That's
it,
the
it feels
Warhammer
like a
Fantasy
stopgap.
roleplay method as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so that's kind of like how you would deal with you don't want your adventure to basically devolve into, well, okay, fuck it, we don't know, oh well, and then you leave, right? But then there's
yeah.
a problem in that as well, because that should be in this truly sort of open game, that should be an
Mm.
option, right? That you say, all
Yeah.
right,
I know.
screw this, I
I
don't
think
care.
so. I think so. Like, and I've certainly had. I haven't had it in the context of mystery adventures in cities or whatever. Partly because, as I say, I might have run one pure mystery and several investigation scenarios. So I don't have a massive sample to be like, oh yeah, out of the 80 scenarios, mystery
Imagine
scenarios I've run.
you've made
Yeah.
up 8 NPCs, you've
Yeah.
bought wigs,
Yeah.
you've
I put them on.
costumes, you've yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, like
Our
you've and then
master.
I'm a
Yeah.
lady. Someone stole my necklace. And then,
Yeah.
10 sessions in, the party says, fuck
Yeah.
it. Prince, this is
And
act
no,
nine. This is
so
enough.
yeah.
Just before
Um,
the payoff.
Well, I think I would say that's fine. What? Yeah, you could say there is a crutch. When the players stop doing stuff, something explodes. Makes
Yes.
sense in some scenarios because there is an organic element to that, but in others, it should be fine. One thing is that probably the truly pure mystery scenario that is just low level is actually going to be for low level parties, and so the thing that happens is probably just they lose. They say they're troubleshooters who are going to solve the crime. They don't. They have a poor reputation now. That's the consequence. At
All
higher
right.
level, obviously, it's going to be it may be more dynamic because you've got like a ninth level magic user doing it, or whatever it is. I'm not,
Oh, yeah.
um,
Some sort of drawback,
yeah,
of course.
yeah.
Right. But
But I think
it's the,
it's that's what I'd say is that the campaign, the truly open campaign. Well, by truly open, we obviously mean within the game, not like actually the map is the size of the real world, but like within the game, the open world is one where things have consequences and they are dynamic. So yeah, maybe nothing happens immediately, but something might happen later. So like the better examples I'm thinking are of my PCs in my big kind of my very long running campaign, being like, oh yeah, well, we won't deal with that now, or come back to it later, or we can't deal with that now, or whatever else it is. In that case, what I then just decide is, okay, in against the cult of the reptile god style, like what happens if they don't do stuff, this develops. So like
everybody starts sarcastically referring to the PCs as a detective.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's
That's
the
right.
low level mystery example, but obviously the high level campaign example might be that you ally with an evil NPC somewhere in a dungeon, you rescue them. I remember like my characters, this is when I did D2. The characters rescued the Drow princess, who was a glass elf, because this was like in a different prime. They rescued this glass elf princess. They also randomly, I'm trying to remember, I think a human they rescued was, I decided was an Agarthan priest, so from like the inner world. And like these two guys, the Agarthan priest went off to his own place, but the glass elf was like, "Hey, I just want to come to your world." And they're like, "Yeah, that can happen if you want." And so they came back through the Nightwolf Inn with her, and so she's just in the Forgotten Realms now. And I'm like, yeah, basically she's establishing a power base, and that's going to have consequences because that's
Right.
the set. And I think that's the general principle: is you don't go like, "I will force this to happen to my PCs so they interact with my content." Like I
No,
think, yeah,
I think I guess I you're kind of right that you don't you could
you don't do it with
more
a
or less
dungeon,
play
so
it in a way that it's not that you're not sort of like
yeah,
forcing people. I just thought of
mm,
another good one,
yeah.
by the way, where the PCs they
Please do
go to
go
the
for it.
inn, and then the innkeeper says, "I've got a mystery for you, gentlemen. Who pissed in your beer?" And then he smiles. Yeah, that's right. You should have solved my mystery. Now
Yeah.
you are a laughing stock.
Yeah, well, I think that's the
Anyway,
thing. In that seems like the natural response to low-level mystery adventures being failed. If you want to talk about it in those terms, there are consequences, but they are social. This is the point that E has made and Grutzy's made about like you're invested in the place; it's your world. Yeah, I do think the idea that they
sure.
are a puzzle dungeon points to that E's
Oh,
idea of they are the
I
open
wanted
puzzle
to
dungeon definitely
point
makes me yeah,
I want to continue actually on another reason why let's turn this
yeah,
into a sort of
mhm,
crusade against mystery adventures, or at least a sort of it's not quite a crusade, but so
yeah,
I noticed this with another one, and this was an adventure written by Willie Walsh, was another mystery, and the
mm,
idea was that it was actually quite clever. It was a little petty dwarven kingdom and some
mm,
heirloom that they or some ceremonial gift that they'd gotten from a neighboring kingdom was
mm,
like stolen, and without that
yeah,
ceremonial gift, like there would be no peace between these two kingdoms, right? So
hmm,
very important. But they get there, and
hmm,
this is a palace, right? It's full of precious stuff that you're not allowed to steal. You have to figure out who took the heirloom, right? You
hmm,
could also, if you were motivated by gold for XP, you would be pawning just like goblets and gold
mm,
silverware and pickpocketing motherfuckers left and right. But you don't actually do that. And the result is also that there's a bunch of different plots going on there. You I guess the adventure kind of implies that if you uncover these gentlemen, you could probably take their possessions, right? But because of this gold for XP format, it feels very difficult.
mm,
Right, you really have to sort of like shoehorn that in there to ensure that
mm,
people get the same sort of like reward. It feels a little
yeah.
bit inorganic. I guess that's why in
Yeah,
later adventures they kind of just ended up giving, like in Warhammer Fantasy, they
story
just give you
XP.
XP. Yes,
Mm,
exactly.
mm. Yeah, I mean, I do think like I don't find that a massive issue. I know what you mean.
Hmm.
This is a discussion that we've had, I think, on this podcast actually on our thing, but elsewhere as well. Is I'm happy. Basically, I'm happy to set rewards GP as part of the gold for XP because I just budgeted it in, but the reward XP is contingent on doing stuff, right?
Yeah, of course.
So I'm fine with reward GP
With
becoming XP.
milestones.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but it's something where here's the thing: it's not the gold for XP is not story XP in inverted commas, but the story XP defined by success at achieving set tasks. The problem with problem with story slash reward GP is, and the reason to use it sparingly at best, not story XP, but in terms of keeping gold for XP, is that you don't want to create a thing where the GM is the only incentivizes adventures one at a time, like leading people by the nose by saying now there is a reward of this, like that's bad because that
Well,
creates
yeah, you're training
a
people
linear
like to
campaign.
be like dogs, right? In
Yeah.
one, it's just you create a situation where there's a reward, and how they get that reward is up to them. And
Hmm.
in the other one, it's like you've got a hoop,
Mm.
you've a flaming hoop and a stick, and you go, all right, boy, let's see, jump through the hoop,
Yeah,
and then
and
they
I
do
think
it, and then
I,
you
I
give them
would say
XP, you give them
the
XP.
solution there is that you need to have many things open it, and this is actually goes back to the campaigns of fate
Yeah,
discussion that you're like, well, if there is only one thing you do at a time in a campaign because it's mostly just this dungeon or whatever, then that is true. But if it's that there are many options that players can go into, and there are different incentives to go into them, there's money, there's enemies might become stronger. Example, in my open table game, the players had rescued the halfling they were searching for down in like some caves, some Zavart caves, and then they found that the caves went deeper, and so that there's immediately you can tell the stupidity here. But they like keep going, they keep going. They're like level
Awesome.
2 or
Yes,
something. They keep
correct.
going,
Very good.
and they get color sprayed by the gnome that they are pursuing, who is actually allies with some Duergar. They're now in the Underdark. He sprays them. They don't get the brush off. He color sprays them,
Oh,
and but the
sorry,
Duergar are
Owen,
willing to
you're
negotiate.
oh, no, no, oh, 1 sec. You
Am I
broke
fine?
up. Yeah,
Am
you're
I
good
fine
again.
now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So these Duergar capture them, but the Duergar are lawful and they have desires. I'm like, okay, they won't kill them then. That's fine.
They have
They will,
desires.
yeah,
Oh,
desires,
this was
perverse
the start of
desires.
Owen's
Yeah,
magical realm. They get
yeah.
tied to the stalactites.
I'm not actually Ed Greenwood, you know.
Now
But
you
yes,
will taste our dark dwarven love-making skills.
yeah,
This is why we were banished. And then
yeah,
5 sessions later.
yeah. You're like, oh man, they're disgusted by the end. And so
all the players are like, man, this Owen, this guy is really sick. I can't take this anymore.
yeah, yeah,
I'm sorry about that.
yeah. Anyway, so the Duergar are like, oh, we want a map of Illafan. We want information on Illafan because that's part
Right.
of the campaign, is it? And so okay, there's like a consequence there. It's a thing they could investigate. Failure led to consequence. They didn't have to go down there. I wasn't forcing them to. They could have gone back later. So there's a whole thing where all those things, and I think the city is the same basically. To go back to the point we're making about mystery, and other social consequences, is you have to have multiple options open, and that is where I didn't have reward XP in this, of course, but reward XP or whatever, or sorry, reward GP as XP, whatever it is, it needs to be part of an ecosystem where players are still making choices, because otherwise you're creating something where players don't decide how to solve problems or how to make money. They just do the thing you ask them to do.
Yeah. And I just had as a stray thought, um, that's also true. Party would have just listen. They're
Yeah.
halflings. They asked for it.
Yeah.
But no, the one I just thought of actually the city adventure that I ran. I would say successfully actually, because it the one. And it's
No one else is playing it.
It's a tricks only adventure as well, right? It's actually not that good, but it has a few elements that are very, very fun. If you can pull it off, if your players are stupid enough. This is B6, the Veiled Society. Right?
Oh yes,
yes. And in
yeah.
B6,
It is interesting. It's not a great. It is not a great module.
No,
yeah,
by no means.
But it is interesting. It is
Yes.
interesting, Jen. Yeah.
Well, yeah. There's a few sort of these intimations of this. It has this sort of dark medieval vibe, right? It doesn't feel like a Ren Fair city adventure. It feels like a medieval city adventure where the streets are incredibly dark, and just like if you wander those streets at night, like you're gonna get like knifed. They're actually dangerous, and some what is it? Some merchant house guy needs to be escorted through the dark streets to a noble house, and he's attacked. And 2 different sides approach the PCs, and one of them is actually the ambushers. So you have to split up the PCs, and if your players are so stupid that they fall for that, it's great because you've split them up, right? And one group is like, all right, just wait here, we're gonna do the ambush, and the other guy is like, they're doing the escort quest, and then bam, you hit them together, and they're like, oh shit, it's great. And that had a payoff, so that was a great adventure.
Yeah. I would say that those moments, by the way, we've talked about this. We touched on this before. We're going to talk about Zeb Cook. When you want to find these things where you're like, oh, he kind of knows things that are fun in an adventure, but because he only ever played this adventure with one person, this is actually true. This is how, you're like, none of it had to hang together. It was just like, here's some stuff. Here's some kind of nice moments, hanging together, and then
it's just tricks only.
Yeah. I think it is part of why that is. I think it's significant is that he can do those good tricks, but there's nothing else in some of his adventures.
Well, I would say
not Dwellers of the Forbidden City, obviously, which is great, but or Isle of Dread, but a lot of the others. Yeah.
Vecna
Well,
lives,
Vecna
I
Lives
think.
is the bad example of that. Yeah, you're right. It's the bad example of that where you're like, no, it's just tricks, but they're just lame tricks. They're not good. Anyway,
I did
Advent.
like I did enjoy that
Yeah,
you had the story game Vecna
yeah,
to death at the end. You were
yeah,
just basically to encounter the mechanics of the game completely broke down. You were
yeah,
just
yeah.
in a sort of like you were in Zev's world and you could do anything.
The weird thing about that is, of course, that you're like, no, D&D lets you fight like 20 hit dice creatures with spells. It's there in the monster manuals. You can just go and do it. Like, why is this so hard later on? And it's not because of the mechanics, it's because of the design, just that people stop understanding like that players can just play D&D. Okay.
Well, he
So,
didn't want didn't
mm,
want Vecna to get killed early on by the
yeah, yeah,
Circle
yeah.
of Eight,
Oh no,
so
so
he
you have
made
to have a
him
bunch of things that
invincible.
stop it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
what
so you have
about
the
E?
story
E
game
asked,
him to death.
E put this one up, I think. Adventure as Night Out on the Town. Let's talk carousing. Let's talk. Yeah, but just touch. Is there anything else we want to add to that? Because we've touched on it a bit, like what happens when you're in the inn, but like how far, like an adventurous thing you do while you're out. You know, like the which is very Faffy in the Grey Mouser. Is it
Yeah, and
legitimate to like just
even
generate stuff?
in well, I was going to
Mm.
say in Milan's games, we have
Mm.
frequently
Yeah, yeah.
ended up in a foreign city, and there just exploring the city. Yes, exactly. You get acquainted with the nocturnal table. There's an area of the
Yeah.
city that is concealed by some sort of sorcery and is not easily entered, where they sell all sorts of illicit goods as well. And yeah, you have your random encounter with various dwellers of the night as well. That's
Yeah.
speaking of Gabber Lux, by the way, I don't know if you he doesn't sell it in Zine format. I guess he
Zine,
could
zine, you loser.
Zine. Sorry, this
Yeah,
is continental
yeah,
pronunciation. Uh,
yeah,
just you have to imagine the extra U, okay? But the
yeah.
no, he has an adventure which is actually I think a pretty good example of a city adventure. It's
Mm,
called In the Name of the Principal. It
mm,
might be one of the best things he's ever done. I haven't read Sistema Tartaro Bases, which might be even better. But in the name of the principal,
mm,
you're essentially sent to
mm,
assassinate this it's just the like the despot of this city
yeah,
state. So you're a group of assassins, and the despot, he has his routine. There's several areas where his soldiers are located in the town, and then it's just sort of like a free environment, and you have
yeah,
to, well, figure out a way to get in his mansion, which may or may
mm,
not be some sort of ancient spaceship, and
mm,
off him
cool.
essentially.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's a good example. That's a big scale city adventure too. That's not like a side trek or an encounter. That is you're
No,
just
that
in the
would be a
city and you're
full.
doing a bunch of
Yeah.
stuff and the
Yes.
end goal of that. Yeah, yeah.
Oh man,
I
I
do
should
think, yeah.
run
So
that.
to
Yeah.
talk a bit about the adventurer's night out, yeah, I guess I do not and would not really think of, and I don't think he means this when he kind of talks about this, be like, oh well, what we should do is every night that you're in a city, you've got to generate events and you've got to do stuff and you've got to wander around, adventures are going to happen to you. I think you could argue that if you were playing a Lankmar campaign, maybe that's what you should do. Like the game is 90% crazy stuff happening in a city. But
Well,
like I think
what if you had the
generally
option,
speaking,
right?
yeah, yeah.
I think it's nice to occasionally,
Hmm.
and again,
Yeah, yeah.
this sort of ties into at least how I've always done it, is that most city adventures tended to be relatively short affairs compared
Mm.
to the
Yeah, yeah.
dungeoning I've run, right? Taking up maybe even half a session, maybe a whole session.
Mhm.
Uh, but
Same in
if
terms
you
of
have
most
the
of the things
option,
that happen in cities. Yeah,
yeah,
doing it
you
occasionally could
return,
be
you
fun.
do
Yeah,
some R&R, and then there's like sometimes the DM
yeah,
and our axe DM
yeah.
would do this as well. He throws a little bit of a crumb,
Mm.
on your trail, and it's like a little hook, and it's baited, and you go, okay, are we gonna bite? Nah, we're gonna go
No,
back to the dungeon. Okay, well, maybe next time, right?
yeah,
So I can see it work like that.
yeah. I think if you use carousing rules, this is a kind of
Yeah.
this is maybe part of if you use carousing rules and stuff like that. And like Chris Kutelik, I think it provides carousing rules. So do many others. There are different versions of
Oh
this out there.
yes.
I've experimented a bit back in the day, but I don't know. If you're doing that, then obviously it becomes more organic to have more stuff happen. Obviously, they can just be very mechanized. You lose 50% of your gold, but also it can be like, oh no, this happens. You know, you're in this situation. You wake up here. You know, like you can have organic stuff happen due to the fact that your carousing gives you XP in those systems generally.
Yes.
So
We should
yeah,
probably actually mention Fever Dreaming Marlinko as
yeah.
a
I
pretty
forgot to pick
good
it up. Yeah, it is. It
OSR
is. City
city
supplement. Yeah.
supplement. Yes.
Yeah, it's not heavily factional, so it's not strong on that side, but it is very good at kind of giving you things to do in a city, including 2 adventure sites. So it has 2 adventure sites. It has people you can interact with. It has hooks, and it has like the stuff you need. Like you can go. These are some special shops basically.
All
Like it
sorts of
does. Yeah,
silly, I guess, sort of silly priesthoods and
yeah.
festivities and stuff going on. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
so and that's one thing is maybe that's the thing, and this I think this is a version of the adventure on a night out is city festivals and stuff. I actually kind of think that stuff's fun. I don't think the Lankmar book has some of that, but you could say, oh, is that just like princess tea partying? Like, oh well, that's just stuff they watch. Like, no, you should have like weird stuff that happens that is always the cover for like cult activities or something like that. You know,
Well, but then you
like
do get in an area where whenever there's a festival or even worse, a circus in the town, the rule of thumb is to
yeah.
immediately kill the circus. That's like leave none alive.
If then again, if you're playing a Chris Kutelik style acid fantasy game, that's good. Partly
That's
it's bad because
okay.
it
Yeah,
causes
yeah, yeah.
chaos, but it's good because it's funny. But yeah, no, I agree. The point is, if you're playing in a sort of generic, if you're going for fairly vanilla fantasy, you want players to interact with it on those terms, not in surreal terms. Uh,
You
there's a thing
want
here. I would
well,
say
there needs to be a
second.
game
Yeah,
reason,
yeah,
but I think probably
yeah.
you want to beat the meta of always killing the circus
Oh yeah,
because if
well no,
something wicked this way comes,
this is where
yeah,
there's a virtuous cycle between these two. This is what I'd say is
yeah.
that the reason that the game works, the game is informed by the fiction, the secondary fiction, which creates a certain kind of meta that you should interact with, and that's interesting. If you're playing in a Gonzo setting, then there are going to be Gonzo things, and that's fine, and no one's going to be upset by that. And the secondary fiction sets up, and as the DM, you don't care. Yeah, you should always kill the clowns. Clowns are known to be evil in this world. That's fine.
No, 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 no. What you do is you for every evil circus you do 2 or 3 decent circuses, right? Like one, maybe you can if you check out, maybe you can get a
Yeah.
weird ass henchman, or you can
Oh
buy
no,
exotic
I agree
animals,
with this.
or
I'm saying no, in the
right.
vanilla game we're playing, so we're playing a
Yes,
vanilla game, that's how the
yes,
circus should be. I'm saying
yes.
if in the Gonzo game, circuses are literally always evil, great. Please do.
We don't
Sounds
we
fun.
don't we discuss these sort of like degenerate offshoots of the one
Yeah.
true game for these decent
Yeah,
people. I'm not sure.
yeah. Yeah, it's after the watershed. I think, yeah, I was going to say, in terms of good, we talked about supplements a bit, but to talk a bit more about, yeah, going out and doing stuff. So, you're traveling across the city. I wish to talk about encounters here. Traveling across the city, or you're doing a kind of carousing night, or you're doing something else. A couple of decent supplements, oh, good. We've talked about some, but Nocturnal Table obviously is good. Nocturnal
Yes.
Table is great because it is just a whole system for buying weird stuff or meeting weird people or just having encounters in different areas. It has like 300 something fully keyed encounters. Yeah, it has names of shops, has places to meet, common NPC stat lines. And it does have a section, to be fair, on the conspiracy. This is a mystery format, obviously. So,
Oh,
like,
there
but
we are.
anyway, yeah, in terms of encounters, I think cities benefit from robust encounter systems. And I say this having had very light encounter systems, but because if players are there regularly, and if you're testing regularly, and you've got whatever system you're using, test once per district you travel into, test once per like hour, whatever it is, then you're going to have so many results eventually over the course of a year of in-game play that the players are going to get like, oh, is this the same thing again? You know, like you read occasionally a Wizards of the Coast city encounter table that's like 10 keyed
Yes,
encounters.
10 entries, and one of them is like a young woman,
Yeah.
asking for help, and it's actually a were rat. And after the third one, you're like, all right, listen up. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is getting ridiculous. You guys need to get a different trick. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so I think there needs to be rust. The other, I will mention one other one. It is by one of the unsung because of his era, relatively unsung heroes, I think. First edition and second edition, Jeff Grubb with Ed Greenwood in this
Is
case.
that a forgotten?
Yeah, it's no,
Really?
it is.
Really?
It's a first edition product, 1988, the City
Oh my
system.
God.
This is so one crazy thing. This is the kind of thing that you should approve of. Really, this is just like CSIO style, like massive maps of every area of the city with loads of generic floor plans and specific floor plans for specific buildings. So it's like here's a generic villa, or here is a specific fortress.
Is it better than I remember the AD&D City of Greyhawk, and when I say I remember,
Yeah.
as in I read part of it and I instantly forgot it afterwards because it was kind of boring.
That's
But
Carl Sargent. I quite like City of Greyhawk. I don't think that it's necessarily amazing. I think it has some very good features. Like it
right,
genuinely has it. Sargent's run on Greyhawk is, I think it's been put. I think someone said maybe on recently, like, oh, it's kind of it's Sargent's Greyhawk. It's just this guy doing this. Like, yeah, it is. He does great. There's Greyhawk Wars. Things are different. But then you've obviously read City of Skulls, which is part of his Greyhawk run, and
I
Night
read
Below
it a
as well.
very long time
Yeah,
ago. I do remember that it was very
yeah,
interesting. That's one of those things where I do want to check that one out. It's on my list, but haven't
yeah.
got around to it yet.
Yeah, Night Below is technically part of that Greyhawk run as well. We've got some comments, which I'll knock up. I don't like carousing as usually seen in the OSR, but again, touching on indirect stuff players desire out of city would often be gained by choosing social actions. These should usually be safe. So the idea that, yeah, so I think he is at least saying to do with encounters, you shouldn't be like every opportunity the players talk to someone, you should be having something wild happen. There's a reason carousing is something that chiefly seems to be something that kind of more gonzo or acid BXy kind of games use. Not
Well,
always, they occasionally to adventurous activities.
I mean, there's something to be said for having a city that's not entirely safe, because again,
Yeah, I
both
agree.
real and fantastic cities, there should be an element of danger for sure. But yeah, it wouldn't make sense if like
Have you
every
been to
10 minutes
Chicago
you,
recently?
you get attacked by a band of
Yeah,
1d6 axemen swinging,
yeah,
from the vines, beating you up.
yeah.
Yeah,
That does happen in Edgar Rice Burroughs books, though. Like, you're on some Venusian city, you walk around the Venusian city for an hour, you are attacked. A
yeah,
kidnapped
by
princess,
braves,
yeah,
yeah, exactly, by
yeah,
noblemen that are like,
yeah.
hey, look at this guy, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no city system, which I assume, yeah, Jeff highly recommends Nocturnal Tables, and we'll have to talk about swords and sorcery at some point, I'm sure. But E says city system was hands down the best FR product. It might well be. There are some other quite good early FR products.
Interesting.
To
Okay,
be
good
fair,
to
I would
know.
say the actual what city system goes with is FR1 Waterdeep in the North. This is a genuinely pretty respectable product. That it has lots of things you kind of it's overwritten, but with small text, so at least you're not losing page space.
Well, I mean,
It
I
has some
imagine the
decent
first time
adventures,
that if you're actually playing in
Yeah.
that game and then have a
Mm,
thief guild that's led by a beholder, if you find out
yeah.
the Xanathar is like
That's
sorry,
pretty cool, isn't it?
spoilers.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Yeah, yeah.
that's pretty awesome. Yeah,
No, I
it's
think
just Forgotten Realms. It's so
yeah.
hard to
Mm,
look at it now and
mm,
not think it's lame because there's
yeah.
so much
I
lame
think
Forgotten
yeah,
Realms that
that's the big
it's
thing
it's
is
hard to
there's
unsee.
a filter issue. It's actually a lot like, and obviously you've been through the same process. It's like the filter issue of second edition products in general, where you're like, there's some real amazing things. Like there are some all time great products in here, but you're like reading stuff and you're like, man, why did I just read that book by Skip Williams, basically?
It makes
And
any book by
yeah,
Skip Williams is a losing bet. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I think it's the same thing with FR. That early FR is pretty good. Most of the products are genuinely pretty good. In the same way that like the stuff from Ed Greenwood that is either early or based on his early material is good, but just the whole thing so
Yes.
expands so much that there's infinite rubbish. And if you just picked up a random FR book, you are not likely to find a good book. It might be okay. The median might be, fine, but it's not good, and you're going to have to do work. But yeah, City System also has like a set of things which I use in Waterdeep. um, but yeah, which has like a whole system to street scene. So you generate how many encounters they find per period of time. But the street scene, lots of the encounters are generic. So it's like foreign merchant, journeyman in the livery of a guild, fishwives engaged in gossip. You can fill this with stuff, but the point is there might be like 4 things happening in the street as you walk down the street over that period of time, and you don't have to do stuff. You could just be like, oh, the broken cart wagon, we'll ignore it. The money changer with 3 guards, well, we could rob him, but that's dangerous. But then it could also be a monster encounter, or it could, it could be drunk bravos, that kind of thing. So, and it
Yeah,
has
just like
picking.
if you want, if you so like if you want, you can like make traveling through the city just like this really immersive experience instead of just
Yeah.
going like, okay, now we go here and then it's bip, 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 and then you're
Yeah.
there.
Exactly, and I think that's something which it just gives you the option of. Hey, Bruce Cordell is one of the all-time great adventure designers. Carl Sargent's stuff is all second edition, pretty much, apart from the PX stuff. So,
I'll endorse most of
yeah,
Bruce Cordell's catalog. Sure, I
yeah.
like them. They're a little bit wordy now and a little
Mm.
bit story gamey, but they're genuinely
Yeah.
pretty fun.
I think the point is they tend to be dynamic situations you can do stuff in. They're story gamey in the sense there's a world-ending threat, there's a thing that's happening, but they are like actual adventures.
You
is the
kind of
point.
have to bite through some of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
bits. You're like, ugh, is it?
Yeah.
Imagine if you've got this great bowl of sushi, but there's cat poop in it. Okay, that's the only drawback. It's that. Are we really going to
Exactly.
let
Yeah.
80 pieces of sushi go to waste because of a little bit of cat poop? I don't think so. Okay, all right.
Right. So
dig
more
in,
on random
loser.
encounters. This kind of connects to some of the stuff. We should finish on encounters soon because I think we've covered a lot of it over the course of the time we've done.
I think so.
But yeah, frequency, balance between ones for color to suggest character and activity of a city versus ones demanding player action response. We just touched on that. I think to some degree you want. It depends how much you're street scening. If you are doing it that you're not doing detailed immersive stuff in the city, probably encounters need to be stuff which is dynamic and you react to.
An encounter on each district, or sorry, a chance to encounter on each district or street, which they did in City State would work just fine.
That's more or less what I do, is once per district or whatever it is, they check. Once per travel through a district. Obviously, if they stay in a district doing stuff, that's more encounters, because that's like so I abstract that to some degree.
Right.
I think I say this is not true because I do different things in different places. Say with Barlick, the Dark Sun city that we're currently in, or Brawl, the Spelljammer city, in those cases, it's like, okay, if there is an encounter that isn't just a street scene, it's dynamic and you're doing something.
I imagine in Dark Sun you would have encounters where you could have a parade of like Templars, and the Sorcerer King is marching through the streets, and then stand aside, all who look on the Sorcerer King shall die. Yeah, something like that.
This is an encounter, not that the Sorcerer King's there, but there is like a parade of some
High
some
Templar.
thing.
Yeah.
And people have to, and so you get shoved aside, but then there might be more encounters. There might be opportunities to pickpocket. That is an encounter on that table. Is like event like that. When I've run in Waterdeep, which my parties have gone via city system, but I use the street scene system because I think it's fun, and it's much more immersive, inverted commas. Like there's much more stuff happening, and so I assume the reactivity is much lower. Like the amount of stuff you have to do is much lower, but that depends on you've already said this, the amount of stuff you give to the players. If it's high, the amount they have to do should be low, because otherwise that's all they'll ever do, and your players will correctly get annoyed, I think, basically.
Yeah, this seems to me, and again, I've never quite dived all the way into like these sort of like city city adventuring in a level where it's as involved as this. I think this is a delicate, tool that you can add to your DMing arsenal.
Yeah, I think so.
But again, I've always sort of
there's a reason
played
why
it more,
the
a little bit
dungeon
more
is the
fast and
presumed.
loose.
We talked about this last time. The dungeon is the presumed environment because it's easier, partly. I don't mean that in a flippant sense. I mean, like, you start there as a player and as a DM because it's more contained. And as the world gets bigger, and this is obviously even more true for domain action, I think it's worth saying, and we'll probably do this as part of a different discussion, high-level campaign, high-level gaming, we'll do another time. But with the domains, I think, and this is not to actually be negative about Axe, about Adventure Conquer King, but with all its systems. But there is a reason why I think part of why Gary has fewer systems is he assumes it is more emergent. Like, you know what I mean? He's like, hey, domain stuff is a lot more like, you're an expert. You're flying by wire at that point. You are so good at this that the players and the DM are going to know what they're doing. Whereas Axe says, let's
It's
systematize that.
well, I'm not sure. It's difficult to. It might also be that a lot of it was hand waved, or even maybe a lot of it is described in chainmail, right? I'm not quite sure if if it was because he fully well, probably he would have. He does put a lot of trust in the DM, so I'll give your theory the a grade of like plausible, definitely. No, I was going to remark on the thing you said about dungeons, that they're the easiest, but you'll also find that it's the standard format for a reason. If you go in there, you'll find that all of your character classes will have like it's like their abilities will just slot pretty seamlessly into this.
Most of their abilities, yeah.
Yes, yeah, and with a because of the more free flowing nature of a city adventure, well, unless you play a thief, which I think you'll feel quite at home. That's kind of like where the thief can shine. But like I feel it takes a little bit more effort. You can definitely make it work, but it's
Yeah,
not quite
yeah.
so self-explanatory, right?
Jeff and E both comment on Tome of Magic, by the way. And I just want to say, Tome of Magic has a brilliant Wild Magic Surge table, which I used on
You're
Saturday.
insane. This is Tome of Magic sucks.
No,
Imagine
no,
shitting up your game with
no,
Wild Magic surges.
no. Hey, they're in limbo, and they're like, so they've got to check basically arcane spells, like wizard spells. Just you got to pass an int check. If it goes wrong, you're on a Wild Magic Surge. It's a really interesting obstacle. Like, I think that's the gimmick of Planar Adventures, right? Or part of the gimmick.
Okay, all right.
And yeah,
In limbo,
yeah,
I'll give it to you. Okay,
yeah.
then in
So
limbo,
yeah,
this
it
is
was.
allowed. But imagine having the wild mage and just turning every session becomes a potential Looney Tunes adventure. And the spells in Tome of Magic, and we went through them. I made pedantic Discord suffer like I suffered. Right, we went all the way through
Yeah.
items, spells, the whole shebang.
There are some good items. The spells are much less useful. Like, there's some
The
dumb spells, there's some bad spells, and there's some
it,
kind of passable
it's
spells, but they're not that good.
It's not that you
The
won't
items are
find
okay.
anything in there, but the ratio of signal to noise
Yeah.
is very brutal. You'll
Yeah,
find
yeah.
even for the
Yeah,
items.
no, it's for items. It is work because UA on First Edition Unearthed Arcana is pretty good for items. I think
Yeah,
even E who doesn't like it is like, yeah, there's some decent stuff there.
obviously you take the
Yeah,
items. Yes,
yeah, yeah.
right.
And some of this, and to be fair, UA has some spells that are interesting. Again, I think Tome of Magic is weird because it just turns out the spells are virtually all either hyper specialized or weird or bad.
Do you want to take take an
Yeah,
episode to go through Tome of Magic with me? I'll do it.
yeah.
We'll go through Tome of Magic.
Yeah,
Right.
it's just Prince speaking yet again.
I will. I'll just go here. How do you explain
Mm,
this? I'll have 64
yeah,
footnotes
yeah,
at least. And this,
yeah,
Owen, when would you use
yeah.
this, dear Lord? And it'll
Oh
be
no,
a
yeah.
magic
I
missive
say
or something like that.
I don't think there's much defense for the spells, is there? Okay, so we've got some other ones. Yeah, we've got a bit of time left on our normal schedule. Here's one. We kind of touched on this. Anything more on this? How to work in city hooks. You touched on this bit. E.g., low priority hooks accumulate between outings to dungeons. High priority hooks taking out their fences, shops, hireling, recruitment pipeline. Like, yeah, how do you work in things that might matter in a city? Do you think?
Well, here, I think here again, City State had it exactly right. That
Mm.
very often there would be hooks under, various taverns
Mm.
and shops as well.
Yep.
I mean, it's almost like self-explanatory, right? Like whatever you
Mm.
talk to a shopkeeper, a sage, or an innkeeper, and here you buy a round of drinks at the bar. What is it? What else do you do in cities? You try to recruit hirelings while you're doing that.
Mm.
While you're putting up
Mm.
signs or whatever method you selected to get hirelings.
Mm.
Hey, you get this rumor. It's like I feel would be there's almost like infinite ways to like have the players. There could be you could have a town crier or what is
Mm.
it? The
Yeah.
notice board, the town crier, and so many ways to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, just to take some, you get rumors and legends were a different thing. I think legends are more like map kind of pointers, aren't they? They're like a quest might be here. So, legend of the Citadel of Agrak, Lich stronghold, wherein can be found the Empire Stone worth 40,000 gold. A
Not
rumor at the
bad.
same place. This is at Verstegen's gaming house. Rumor, Count Rudlib the Razor, a mad killer, has just been released from prison. Rumors that the constable's barracks, a hill giant, is wading across the estuary in the wrecked bridge. So that's quite pressing. There's a hill giant coming potentially. So that's
Yeah.
quite
Well, the hill
or
giant can't, he probably can't enter the city without. So this is something where you're like, well, okay, let's intercept that guy. Okay, how many
yeah,
bows
yeah,
do we have?
yeah.
Perfect.
Rumor, a lucky troll named Ezerix just won 650 GP at Masher's Gaming House. So that's obviously again a potentially immediate one because, or at least soon,
You're
because you're
gonna
going to want to
rob
go and
that
find.
troll. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, whereas the Cecil of Agrak is more like what is that dungeon, that kind of weird living dungeon Fafnir and the Grey Mouse go to, very very D&D esque, like the Jewel in the Forest or whatever it's
It was
called.
in the
So
forest,
yeah,
yes. This was some
yeah, yeah,
sort of trap house
yeah,
that was
yeah.
constructed, by
But yeah, that's the thing. That's more like, oh, you hear about a location and you go out and do it, or the same with
yes,
Stardock actually for Fafnir and the Grey Mouse. So we're going to climb a mountain, and find it. There is obviously literally and obviously inspired by that, but not the same thing. Rolaids Adventure. You've reviewed, I think, Pinnacle, which is similar. Where it's like, hey,
absolutely,
what
I have.
happens if
Yeah,
you have to climb a mountain?
it was
Legend
even
of
a
the Owlbear
race.
Shield. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I was going to mention one. There was one hook. I'm not sure if it was in City State, but
Mm-hmm.
somebody it was like one of those City State inspired hooks, right? And I think the idea
Mm.
was that like basically a saber-toothed tiger had escaped from the overlord's personal menagerie. But if you so he really
Yeah,
wanted it back, but if you harm so much as a single
mm.
hair on its head, it's the death penalty for
Yeah,
everyone, right?
yeah,
So yeah, that sort of stuff. It's
yeah.
perfect. Or it's what is it? It's the
Yeah.
overlord's pet
No,
cockatrice has escaped. Like again, possibilities are endless.
oh no, I think that's true. I think that's good. Um, and that's and so yeah, I think what you could say is, yeah, you're going to get three types of hook probably. One is the absolutely immediate rumor in city state terms, a giant is coming, that kind of thing. A gin, I think one is like a gin is traveling south along Temple Street. That is, you're not going to be able to do that tomorrow, so you have to go now. A
Right.
second is maybe the semi-immediate. Oh, the troll has won gold. Maybe come up with a plan to rob him, or like the Lankmar adventure. This guy is about to transfer these goods. You need to work out a heist plan if you want to do it, or
Yeah. Within a
maybe you
fixed
can
amount of
wait.
time,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
maybe you can wait for a week while you go to the dungeon and get some, whatever. But like, you've got to do it soon. And then there's the third type, which is the out. Well, I guess the third type is here's a long term thing, but that's not usually. That's more like a factional thing. The vizier is receiving shipments from an alchemist, and it turns out it's like medicine for his weird magical like venereal disease or something. Um,
Sure, yeah.
you know, and that's a more long term thing. And then the fourth type is you use the city, and this is obviously the primary type actually to send people back out. In city state terms, that's a legend. But yeah, rumor tables tend to be after all like
Or
that.
even to
Yeah,
a dungeon underneath the city, right? Yeah, of course.
yeah,
The what is it? The classic, the temple of so
mm,
and so has
mm.
a jewel the size of a man's fist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you get a bit of that in a little bit of that in the Wishery books what's it called? I'm afraid I forget it, but the Wishery ones by Ben Lawrence, I've reviewed them on the channel. And
Is
backed in Jewel of the Seas. This is a city supplement by Gabor Lux to be used with a nocturnal table. This is part of his very, very good vanilla fantasy Aurelion setting, like slightly Celtic themed Aurelion, vanilla fantasy. I don't know if you've read. It's what a bunch of the echoes from Fomalhaut were originally. Like the first 8 issues were like half of it was Aurelion, pretty
I've
much.
yet to delve into Echoes. My
Echoes
Gabor
is great.
Lux crawl
Yeah.
is has only just begun.
Yeah. The rumor table is only a D20. We're going to judge you, Gabor, for not being fresh enough. But yeah, I think obviously 20 rumors. For me, I often will do that as a campaign start. You start here. Here's rumors, albeit obviously a bunch of these are actually about the city itself rather than about the wider setting. So I guess my
That's
starting
fine.
rumor table tends to be, we'll talk about that in campaigns, tends to be about everything. There's a random encounter table, separate from the nocturnal table, but you can use that too. And then the location, he does a really interesting thing that there are two things he's doing. There's a deal of the day, I should say there's a deal of the day table. Kelp Plague and Tolto are half-orc watchmen who are looking for wealthy and strangers to inspect for falsely cited irregularities, and they're shaking them down. Or Dag the Maniac Distiller. Spirits right from the still 1 silver piece of cup. His noble distillates, 10 gold pieces per wax sealed vial, are foul, but suitable as flaming oil, i.e. Greek fire. Nice. But he does locations. Letter codes are city locations. Numbers are the undercity. And then also, you can have the surrounding wilderness. Now, you can go and do adventures in some of these city locations, absolutely, because there are things that just will happen. But obviously, many of them connect to the undercity. So this is a classic city adventure kind of trope, isn't it? And this is both the streets as dungeon and dungeons in cities, which were questions we had. Is how do you see what about when the city is seen primarily as a fast paced, you're going to move at adventure speed, 10-minute exploration turns to get places? I think the classic one for that feels to me to be the undercity. Like you have to go into a place that is liminal and is not just inhabited by nobles and merchants.
Well, yeah. Then
Yeah.
then you're just going into then you're just using dungeon crawling rules, so that you've basically transposed your city adventure into a dungeon adventure for sure.
Yeah.
But
I was going to say
you use dungeon adventuring rules in heists as well, right?
you often, because you're using time, as in you're
Yeah,
using measurements of time. Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say the example here. He's got a city map with references to the undercity on it, and then there are undercity maps as well. I don't know if it's City of Vultures. I think it is, but he also has another city which is has extensive undercities going all the way down to classic level 9 is ancient technology, like it's an ancient subway station for of high magitech in ruins, which is cool, by the way. Never let the nerds get you down. But yeah, so I think dungeons in cities, I feel like they're necessary, and I feel like every big should have a mega dungeon or a sprawling undercity or a sewer complex. I think that it should be is de rigueur personally.
Every it can be very good. Okay, I won't say always. I'll say it definitely helps. It's par for the course for your fantasy adventure game if you have some sort of undercity for sure.
Yeah. And I guess you could also say is, how many cities are your players going to? And I say this is a practical question in a sense, because in my Big Realms game, my players have gone to many major cities because they travel around doing stuff. They're high mid-level heading into high level. So they're going to oh, we're going to Baldur's Gate. Oh, we're going to this. And they're starting to interact with the politics and stuff in various places. So in the small towns they started in, it might not matter as much. But obviously once they're in Waterdeep, there's Undermountain, that kind of thing. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, so it depends how many cities there are. If you're in a setting where there is only one city, that should definitely have an undercity. I'd say that's a rule. If you don't do that, you're not a good DM. I say that just what I mean is that's the trope, isn't it? And it's natural. But I think maybe that's one thing is you presume that is when you're at the city that has 10, 20, 50, 100,000 people, not Homlet. Homlet does not have a undercity.
No, I mean that's a town, right? I
Yeah.
guess I'm just thinking about well, what's the eventual purpose of a place like that? And it's just to be, it's to serve as as the mega dungeon, right? It's to serve that
Yeah.
role. So
Hmm.
I guess as long as you have some area within the starting domain that serves that role, then you're probably good. You don't have to,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
where you put it is kind of up to you.
Yeah.
Although, our Axe DM had actually placed this mega dungeon 20 days travel or something. What is it? 14 days travel. Some of it through dense forest. This was
Yeah.
wilderness, right, from
Yeah.
the city, and that was rough because we had to travel. We had to travel through we had to weather all those random encounters, which were
Yeah.
often way
Yeah.
more perilous than the
Yeah. I
dungeon
think there's a
inhabitants.
reason. Yeah, I think there's a reason why Castle Greyhawk is next to the city of Greyhawk.
Yeah, yeah, very much
It's
so.
it's it's less than a day's travel. I think I need to check the map,
They
but
recommended
yeah.
in a fight on adventure as
Mm.
well, and sorry, a fight on article as well, and I think it's maybe even in the DMG that
Yeah,
the
no, the
first dungeon
DMG
shouldn't be
does
that
say
hard to
yeah.
reach.
Well, the DMG says the first dungeon. I guess we're talking about also the mega dungeon option.
Yeah, yeah.
I
That's the one they
think
mean.
anomalous subsurface environment is less than a day from the nearest town. It's
Yes.
longer from Denethix. I think it's a couple of days from Denethix, but you can go to a town, like Chestershire or whatever it's called, that that one.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah,
you can
it
get
makes sense
it's
that
very
if you
close.
if you just get started, then
Mm,
the
yeah.
people go there for the dungeon, and if if even getting to it is a whole ordeal,
Yeah.
and that
And yeah,
just
this
chews
is
you
to
up.
do with the
Yeah,
way in which the wilderness. Yeah. So I guess the moat house, which isn't really a first level dungeon. I mean, to the point that like Gary even gives balance notes on it because he understands there'll be first level parties who are too small and weak, which are like, it's really a
oh,
second
that
level.
moat house, you get
Yeah.
chewed up. But like even those
The
giant frogs in the beginning,
yeah
it's just like
yeah
savage. Yeah,
yeah. It's a second level dungeon really, but that is next to Homlet. It is an hour away, I think, by map distance. So
something like that. Yeah.
you don't even have to roll an encounter. Yeah. Oh, he literally says 1 hour away. um, is that Gary's recommendation, or are you talking about Homlet? But yeah,
He's
exactly.
talking about Hamlet.
Yeah, it's an hour away, and if you're using the 1E DMG wilderness rules, that doesn't generate an encounter automatically, even though it technically might be through woods, because I think there are woods to the east of Homlet. That would be every 4 hours, so you can travel
I-
there without an encounter
Isn't
check.
there some sort of patrol, or was this only if you also used Temple of Elemental Evil? We're getting a little bit off track here, but I'm just
Yeah,
speculating. I remember
I
some
think no,
sort of
it
null
no,
patrol.
it's relevant because no, yeah, I think there's a null militia which might activate, but I don't think there's a patrol by the temple. Castle Greyhawk was 1 hour away. Yeah. Um, but yeah, so yes, it is relevant because there's questions about the constraints. Is a dungeon underneath the city more constrained, would you say, than a dungeon an hour or 4 hours away from a city?
I think you can. This is I feel you have so many options that it's kind of hard to answer. I think you should be able to make it work
Mm,
in both cases. I just think of
yeah.
Empire of the Petal Throne, right, which has
Mm,
the Patala underworld, I believe it's called, which is
mm,
just this immense series of catacombs and caverns underneath the just right underneath the city. You should
yeah.
be able to do whatever you
Yeah.
want.
I think so to a degree. I think it's format wise. If you're like, yes, there's actually a large aggressive orc tribe living underneath the jeweler's shop. like,
Well, so
uh,
again, then you make a sort of
well, I'd say that is
maybe
going to
you
that's
make a
going to
little bit
struggle.
of a liminal you make a little bit of a
Yeah.
liminal
Yes.
zone
This is the point. I
immediately,
think is
right?
that there
That's
are things
why
that
I'm
don't
yeah,
work. There are
sure.
things that don't work, but I think that with a tiny bit of effort, of course, it works. If you're talking
Or
undermountain,
yeah, or even what is it? Let's say you do put that aggressive orc tribe on level one, but then maybe
yeah,
you don't enter the dungeon through a
mm,
10-foot stair. Maybe you go
yeah,
in through a pit or an
yeah,
elevator, something like
yeah.
that, right?
Oh yeah, it's level one, but it's actually gated off. Like there's a mechanistic gating. But yeah,
Yeah,
if you're
for
talking
sure.
undermountain, the fact that like, oh wow, there's all these crazy animals that have been brought in here by whatever that the Mad Mage is called. Oh, and yeah, there's Skullport. It's a whole parallel settlement run by a beholder. Yeah, that's fine because that's like 9 levels down in a gigantic mountain in the middle of a city. Whereas if the large tribe of orcs who are very aggressive live in the basement, you're like, why didn't they invade? Or why didn't they leave? One
I think,
and I think
oh
that's
yeah, you
yeah,
can even do the,
yeah.
in the basement, there's been a collapse into this.
Mm,
Oh, there's a
mm,
dungeon underneath? We didn't know. And then you put
yeah.
whatever, there's 20 guys with crossbows that are like, all right, yeah, a couple of orcs tried to come through here. Well,
Mm.
yeah,
That's actually that's a thing I've done
I
with
know that's in
Dark Sun
Greyhawk.
was yeah. When in Dark Sun, there's like antloid warrens below the city, which are part of actually like well just outside the city, but part of a wider set of things. And the reason that they haven't been discovered or they haven't come to contact is that it's in the silver mine. So they've recently breached in to where the antloids live. So they're like, oh yeah, so like there's a work party down there. They got attacked by some giant insect things,
For
and
sure.
now we've got guarding the kind of the underworks. So we're still doing everything, but you're like, yeah, that. And of course, the antloids don't need to be that aggressive. They're not like, man, let's just go and invade the surface. They're like, oh, let's make sure our place is safe. So it becomes a natural liminal zone, even though it is right next to the city. So yeah, I think that's
Uh,
right. And I
Again,
think
I
yeah,
think you
obviously,
can get away with
mm,
murder if you're a little bit creative. Even if you have,
mm,
you have a whole level full of wights and mummies and wraiths, then Well, you can always pull the old trick of like, oh, there's ward stones that keep the undead at bay, right? Or
Well, I think
something like
that's the
that.
thing. You can have crypts with restless undead either because it's recent, that's a classic
Yeah,
rumor thing. Go to the place to set them, or because it's gated. Like
yeah.
the dragon underneath Backlin is asleep. So that's that makes sense, doesn't it? Like it. Of course, it's not invading everywhere because it's asleep. Yeah. Obviously, some also like sewers. I think I used a Dyson map actually for the catacombs of Castle Brackenwold in my Donwood game, and there's a big sewer section which is like, oh yeah, like essentially it's the Roman sewer, like the ancient the Goman sewer is there, and then off that there's loads of stuff. There's just loads of stuff behind secret doors or behind portcullises. And it's something which the players accept as the mythic underworld, don't they? It's the liminal zone. They're not like, why isn't everything invading the sewer? It is something which you're like, no, this makes sense in my myth brain. This is normal, I think.
Well, by the way, I was going to ask, do you
Yeah.
know any? I think there's another popular conception that actually most sewer adventures suck too, and except for,
I
of course, the legendary Swords and Sorcery
Sorcery, yeah.
series. Yes.
Yeah, so some would say the best city adventure of all time.
uh, I haven't read all of them, but no, I do genuinely mean it that Swords and Sorcery actually did okay with well,
Mhm.
just presenting a sort of a slum area and then like the sewers
Mhm.
beneath as just a traditional dungeon format, right? But
Yeah.
it felt right. It
Yeah.
hits right.
Yeah, just before we go into sewers, he's got some comments. City dungeons are more weighted toward undead mutations and cults. I know that's Warhammer Fantasy, but it's
Cults,
also I think a
were
D&D thing.
rats,
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
you
yeah.
name it. Yeah,
Oh, he does add. This a couple of minutes ago, to be fair. Cults, bandits, spy posts, pirates, and port city, cities where you get to break out humans as monsters.
yeah.
Yeah, I know, I agree. I think, yeah, I no, Jeff. He doesn't mean he didn't judge both swords and sorcery. He simply hasn't read
I
every
mean
single
all
city
of
adventure.
the city adventures.
Yeah,
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 but
yeah.
no,
So that,
I
yeah,
did like them a lot.
why do sewer adventures suck by by reputation? Do you think?
I think it's because of, I guess, cliches that people fall into the same, you know,
Hmm.
okay, there's an Oitiug. Okay, what else do you put in the sewer? Like ghouls, I guess, and then rats. I think people fall into cliches and don't really fully, utilize the sort of semi fantastical sewer environment.
Yeah, yeah. I think well, maybe the point is there that the what you're suggesting is the sewer. I don't think there's anything wrong with using Otyugs in sewers or whatever else. To be fair, I think it's that you always have to put it. You always have to make. And for the first, if it's just newbies, no one's like, oh man, everyone's seen an Otyug. Of course, we're partly speaking as jaded cynics. But you're right that I think what happens is probably that it becomes a low effort call in because it's like, oh well, I guess this is just what happens. I don't think the sewer has to be
There's
mythic,
a
but yeah,
limited
yeah,
palette, I think, of like monsters associated with
yeah,
sewers. So
hmm
what you'll get is a sort of
yeah.
hyper focus of whenever people try to make and
Yeah.
publish sewer adventures,
You
they'll
need you need to be creative in any adventure. You need to be able to willing to say, here's a new spin on an old thing, or here is a new thing that works. Um,
exactly.
everyone, sewer adventures, put your fluke men in the sewers. Fluke men in the sewers.
Flumps go in there, giant platypuses. Who else
Now,
goes in a
have you not
sewer?
seen the host, the X Files episode, The Host with Fluke Man?
No,
Have you? Google it.
I have not
Google the
seen it.
picture. Get the picture up. Go and get it up. The Fluke Man.
Also, by the way, oh sorry, were rats. We also have to
Where?
put were rats in the
Yeah,
sewer. So you'll
yeah.
encounter, I don't know, one character. He'll be based on a popular OSR author, but he'll actually be a rat monster.
Yeah.
Yeah. That you have
Yeah.
to kill in the
Yeah.
sewer.
Yeah, no, he's an author famous for his opinions about Castle Zinterland and layout.
Oh,
Uh,
jeez. I didn't say anything. Anyway, yeah. Um,
I heavily implied it. I heavily
okay,
implied it.
that's great. That's good.
Yeah, but no,
Whatever.
I think that's yeah. But say it's a sewer. One, it has to be. It just has to be a functioning dungeon. It can be generic. It can be vanilla. I actually would push back against the idea that's bad. for newer players that works. You can have one of those in your campaign. But the point is, it has to have enough evocation, enough stuff that's like, oh, what's going on here? Or I'm, confused by this. Or here's a new thing. So Fluke Man, which Jeff correctly says is one of the best episodes. That was Darren Morgan wearing the suit, our later story editor and writer, who wrote the Humbug, the one with like the one with the carnies. So we're talking about evil circuses. Prince, this is an episode where Mulder and Scully go to the circus, where they go to like a retirement kind of
They should
town for
have
circus
killed the
people.
circus instantly.
No,
And
the
anytime
the
there's
whole
a circus, you have to.
no, the whole gimmick of the episode at some level is all the circus people are more normal than Mulder and Scully. It's like the first true comedy in the X-Files, and they're all like freaks. They're like, oh yeah, we're freaks, and some of them are like, well, I'm not a freak. I'm just like, whatever. You expect me to have this, but Mulder and Scully turn out to be like they are basically the townies who don't understand normal life. It's great. It's great.
Well, good to
This
know.
is a good.
I was
This is
going
a
to
good answer,
say
by the
that
way. The sewers should be a more degenerate and dangerous reflection of the city above. Every city should have its own flavor/feeling.
that's a good idea. But what I was going to say is that, like,
Mm-hmm.
if you make a sewer adventure, it still has to abide by the sort of like
Mm-hmm.
the rules of any other good dungeon, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's if the sewer trapping shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
make that any different. You're still,
Yeah.
you're still just doing dungeon craft, and you know what
Oh yeah, but
you know how to make a
yeah.
good
The
dungeon.
dungeon should be a dungeon. The dungeon should be a dungeon. But I'd say the spin. I think I like you thinking. How do you make a sewer mythic? Because it shouldn't be the mythic underworld of nothing is true. Everything you knew is no longer true. That's not the approach you want. In the sense you want it to be something which
Some sort of
like
occult
yeah.
underground, yeah. Where
Yeah,
the
it's
the
something slightly
city's
different. Yeah, dark
seedy,
reflection. Yeah,
yeah, exactly, where
yeah,
that's exposed.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, here let's very quick game. I mean, I said this could be just like dissing cities, but like let's talk about real world cities. What's because Neverwhere does do this. Obviously, Neverwhere is this idea of under London, right?
I've read
Um,
Neverwhere, yeah.
yeah. So what is I've been to Amsterdam once, so I can't possibly say in detail about. But like, what's the undercity of Amsterdam? What's the dark reflection of Amsterdam?
Well, I mean, I think it would just also look like Amsterdam. It would be
It'd be a
slightly
one-to-one
dirtier,
representation.
and there would be
Yeah,
even more tourists. But otherwise, it
yeah,
would just be completely the same.
yeah.
I don't
Probably.
really know. Like again,
Yeah.
this is uh with this sort
No.
of like real life exercise. It's hard to sort of
Yeah. No. Had to. But
transpose this. I guess it would
yeah.
have even more prostitution, and there would be
Yeah.
more.
Well, no.
You go into the sewer,
Yeah.
and it would be a guy who would be like, "Hey, you want to buy some drugs?" And then you go, "Of course." And then he says, "Are you sure these are illegal drugs?" And you go, "Oh, okay. Oh
I
shit.
actually in Amsterdam, like I went
Whoa."
with some friends, and my friend like went to get some orange juice. This is a true story. You get it for free. He was like, "I'll go and get some orange juice for breakfast." Really kindly, he walked along and got some orange juice and came back. And then some guy just like backed him into a corner and really politely was like, I don't know if it's Dutch or not, but let's say it's like, hey friend, do you have some cash? I need some cash. I need a little bit of assistance, and was obviously mugging him, but in this like low speed mugging system. And my friend was just like, okay, I've got this, and he gave like whatever cash he had, not very much at that point. That was the last morning, and then came home with his orange juices and was like, I think I just got mugged. So yeah, that is. But I think you could play with that. The idea that like the undercity of Waterdeep is full of weird magic stuff. Like Waterdeep is the high fantasy city, and Undermountain is just full of like,
Everybody's
which is
dumping
yeah, literally it's a
their
dumping
fucked
ground of
up
just like
potions in
weird
the
stuff.
sewer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And you could play with that for different ideas, like for Lankmar. I know the thieves' house is not actually the undercity, but it's a reflection of it. Like you just go in and it's just like shadowy and dark and weird and twisty, and there are like
And you've got the gods in
mummy thieves.
Lankmar, right?
Yeah. There
Yeah.
are
Or the
mummy
gods
thieves.
of
Yeah.
Lankmar, actually,
Yeah. Oh,
are under
indeed. Yeah.
there.
The
Yeah.
idea, like, which obviously Marlinko steals that idea of like a Carver style. Yeah, bicycles going through 5-foot hallways. I think the idea that you could have something that is just like it seems to be in the case of the sewer the dumping ground of that city, the reflection of that city, and like a city that's very religious of many temples. The idea that you have like a great under hierarch. I think that like everything is run by the under hierarch,
1 second,
full of
Owen.
cults. Yep. Yeah, Grutzy, Berlin a few years ago because
Sorry
of
about that.
work. No. Railway tunnels, old buildings, bunkers. Yeah, obviously, Paris has its catacombs, so some cities have real life undercities that are pretty extensive. But I think, yeah, the idea that the undercity in the sewer is the dark reflection, where like, yeah, the city is run by its under hierarch and famous for its lawful good
I th-
paladins, but actually all the city's corruption and all the under the surface degeneracy happens in the sewers. I
that
think
would work.
that's a
I
good
think
one. Yeah.
in Berlin you still have these networks of bunkers, right?
Mm.
That go like even go underneath the railway and that sort of stuff.
They
That
they
have
were
been there
constructed
since
to store
yeah.
just to store like Dairy Queen ingredients.
Right. No, but yeah, like I guess yeah, that would probably work. Sure.
Yeah. Victoria,
Satanists
British
hanging
Columbia.
out there. They should have adventuring part. If we can have
Yeah.
Satanists, we can have paladins. I think
Yeah.
and witch
I mean,
hunting.
I feel like it's British Columbia. No offense, Jeff. So it's like you're gonna have to recruit some Americans to cross the border, or some like some Northwest Territories guys are gonna have to come down on a great spirit quest to take them out. Like we're gonna take out the Satanists under Victoria. But yes, I like that idea of the city as the undercity and the sewer and the kind of as reflection. I might play with that. That's quite nice. Um, okay, what about the streets as a wilderness? Like, is there any ways in which the city adventure is wilderness like?
Well, sure. Definitely if you especially if you go out at night or you go into these dangerous
Mm,
districts, then you'll have the same sort of like I guess economy of motion where if you move around the city, there's a chance that
mm,
you'll get there's sort of like a price, I guess, if you do it properly, where
mm,
it's not quite
yeah,
free to move or risk free to move about the city. There's a chance that you'll get whatever
yeah,
mugged or otherwise
mm,
encounter some
yeah,
sort of opposition for sure.
yeah. I guess there is some specific context where a city ends up being much more like a dungeon or a wilderness over the scope of the city when so I guess a city with which is the warriors, we're playing the warriors, right? And so when you're traveling between parts of the city, it's there, it feels a lot more like traveling between safe rooms in the dungeon or whatever the parallel you want is. I can see that,
Maybe you'll have to
like,
pay a
yeah,
toll or yeah, something
yeah,
like that. I do feel that some of this is very opt-in. I'm curious
mm,
how much of this
mm,
you should use. I think if you're going to
yeah,
make the city
yeah,
if it's going to be a very long feature, then absolutely do it. But if it's just going to be an area that the PCs visit to
mm,
offload some cash, then and for the rest they
yeah,
just spend their time in an inn, then well,
yeah.
they should probably be able
I
to
think
reach the marketplace.
it's interesting looking at Warhammer Quest as the most D&D like RPG of the 90s in terms of like here's a new game, like very very clearly reliant much more on D&D than on any other kind of role playing game. Um, Maybe RuneQuest, but it's much simpler. It's simpler than D&D. So, but it's interesting that the downtime there is apart from the kind of crazy event system, like the wilderness events and then city events. Uh, you then just have locations, both shops and special locations you can go to in the city. You spend a day doing each one. You get a roll on the table or whatever, or you get to buy an item, whatever it is. You check for stock. There's a stock generation system for shops. That's it. Like that's the entire system. And there are events, but the events are pre-written. Because it has to be able to be played solo or co-op. And I think and it does suggest if you've got a DM in it, a GM, then they should run their own events. And in the major place that like the settlement I'm currently using in our Warhammer Quest campaign, it's all the shop tables. I've kept all that stuff, but I've been like, hey, there's a couple of mysteries they can look into that lead back into dungeon environments, basically. Um, so yeah, I think there's like something there. But I think generally speaking, that's not a bad model for a city that the city is a place the players. I think you said this about most social things should be easy to do. You go to a shop, you buy something. I actually do not, of course, naturally, when players like we're in the city, can I buy some rations? I don't even then. I don't even check for encounters for that. I might do if they're like, can we go out and go to a shop? But if they're just like, when we're back in this place, can I buy some rations when we get there? I won't check for any encounters. I'm like, yes, you buy rations. You know.
So is this? Yeah, there's probably a degree of like opt-in, but
Mm,
if you if you run it at an even larger scale, where the players just
mhm,
occasionally pop into the city, buy some stuff, and move out, then even then you could just, um, I mean, can easily use like again, you can resort to a random encounter table, and maybe this one time when you're in the market, you do get I don't know, you get roughed up, or
Yeah.
could be
Yeah, you
thieves,
can
fucked up city guards, whatever.
yeah, you can kind of narrow it down and down to, I mean, you could literally have nothing happen, but maybe that's not ideal because the idea, and Gary does think city adventures are good, right? He is like, oh yeah, it's good. And of course, he does have a city adventure. Um, it's a weird one. Like, he doesn't have what you do. He's not like, oh, here's the city of Greyhawk. He never writes about that. There is a city adventure, isn't there, in the Gary oeuvre?
I'm trying to run. Oh,
Yeah,
D3.
D3 is a city adventure.
That's right. It's
Maybe Gary's best
also
adventure, controversially, but
I
arguably, like,
that's
definitely
not a
top
bad
three.
pick, but the problem with
Yeah,
D3 is that you get quite a lot of content and gameable content as well, and
yeah,
almost very little in terms of procedures or how to
yeah.
run it. You've got some pretty awesome tables there. You know, that there's factions. There's a system of like brooches, but a lot of it is like implied. You just kind of have to
Oh yeah,
infer it
it's
from all of
something.
these invisible details.
Yeah, it's something where the early TSR format is obviously not a bad format for adventures. It's the most successful one there's ever been. So this isn't a criticism of it. But occasionally you just see it begin to break down, don't you? Where you're like, oh, this is right at the edge of what this can do in terms of, you want a 32-page adventure, because you realize, and I said this I think in my review of it, of D3, which I reviewed separately on its own, was basically, yeah, this just needs to be like 48 pages or 64 pages. There's so many ideas here that are being
Um,
compressed into this quite neat package. I
would
think.
it would it could it you I don't think a lot. I'm trying to think how much breathing
Mm,
room would genuinely improve it. And this is also, we touched on it before, right? Where okay, you think like, okay, who is the audience? And I do think that at when you're at D3, that Gary kind of thinks like, all right, big
the
guy,
DM
you
knows what
got
they're doing.
this. Yeah,
Mm,
you got to this level, you know. Here, bring her home. I've given you
yeah,
enough like hints, basically.
yeah.
You can
Well,
make you
this
can do
kind
it.
of relates to what I was suggesting about why domain play is under procedured in the DMG, even though domain play did happen extensively in Gary's game. Either it's not been put in there, or it was hand waved at the time, or a lot of it is fly by wire. He assumes that DMs kind of can fill in the gaps. Those are the options. E says, I don't mess with transactions much, more getting information contacts, watch allies who tell you when they'll be doing customs duty, that kind of thing. So the idea that buying stuff is basically the boring part of this. I should say, I don't think haggling tables or whatever you want to use are bad. It just, as with many things, it's a sprinkle. Like, sure, when you're going to haggle with Master Smith, feel free to use a reaction check, basically.
Well, I
Uh,
think yeah, so it's more an admonishment, I think, to that speaks to the general principles
mm,
behind D&D, that things that are 100% predictable
yeah,
are kind of boring. So there
yeah.
should be a small amount of risk, but yes, obviously it should not be the same as say traveling through a swamp or
Yeah, you go to try to buy some caltrops
immediately get
from the
stabbed
from
to
the blacksmith.
death. Yeah, by
No,
30
you're like,
level 9 pickpockets. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
can I buy 30 caltrops? Well, make a reaction check. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a very bad reaction.
He's
Level 9
hostile. He
pickpocket, stabbed
bashes
to
your
death. Yeah,
brain in.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously you should just like, yes, you buy some caltrops. I think it's, yeah, what you could say there is you want your special locations. You should have some shops that are fun. I think, again, I find like players do hook onto this. It's part of their engagement with the world, but it
Have
needs to be something,
have
again,
you ever
it's the sprinkle.
read the Thieves World books?
I haven't. I know you like them. I know there was a extensive D&D range, relatively expensive D&D range of Thieves World books
Oh
as
yes.
well.
Yeah, that as well. No, Thieves World is I think
Was it
maybe the
Chaosium
best.
created Thieves World? Is Thieves
Yes.
World Chaosium? Yeah.
I think so, at least one of the
Yeah.
versions. But Thieves World was next to Lankmar. I think is one of
Mm,
the best sort of fantasy
yeah.
stories about this. About this, it's like almost like fantasy Sin City, basically, about this
Yeah.
enchanted, sort of like, yeah, just low life filled city of criminals.
Uh, Jeff says no. Is that Chaosium did not do Thieves World? Or are you just saying no to the entire discussion about Thieves World? Nope, no Thieves World. No more Thieves World anymore. Yeah. Okay.
ILCM 1981.
Nice.
There we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
Thieves
actually
World sounds like.
designed by Dave Arneson.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if I knew that. Maybe I had heard that. I do think that not for now, but I actually thought those you recently put out some screen caps of some Arneson interviews and stuff, and classic like and his players saying about it, and partly some of this is myth making, much like people in 2010 saying, yeah, Gary never actually used any rules. He'd just like say, what do you want to do? Obviously, it's not true. But I think there is this thing where you can see that Arneson is this sort of like cracked, he's lazy and he's a cracked genius. There's these moments of like, oh, this is a cool idea, or yeah, that sounds fun. And then it's like, and then I came up with a system whereby, you would roll 47 dice, but you wouldn't look at them, but you'd sit on them. And if there was the shape imprinted in your butt was this, you're like, okay, great. Like just this
What?
stuff that was, yeah,
Well, like he tried his own. Arneson tried his own. His stab at the role playing game greatness with what is it? Adventures in Fantasy, right? Which
yeah,
again, nobody in their right mind remembers or plays. If you read about, at least from the Fight On magazine, it when you read about his house rules for, well, this would be
mm,
OD&D essentially. It's almost like Free Creek Spiel-esque. So you get an
yeah,
idea of a guy who's very good at, and from the interview too, you get this idea of like a guy who's he's you know um, he's good at improvisation.
yeah,
He probably runs a great game, especially also from like his the play reports and that sort of stuff. Definitely not so heavy on the rules. So I feel that
yeah,
there are certain personality types that
mm,
are conducive to building systems, and other people who probably genuinely fare better under this improvisation. But yeah,
yeah,
probably not the best game designer ever. But also did probably I believe it that like he definitely had a pioneering role in D
yeah.
and D. I don't want that to
Yeah.
snow under entirely.
Indeed. E says, yeah, so Thieves World didn't invent Chaosium, but they did write it. E says he uses City of Haven from Thieves Guild, underrated. I was going to say, before I'll move back to a city adventure question in a second, probably our last proper question or discussion point. But on a note to fantasy adventure, whatever it's called, it's interesting about Gary that people are like, he writes D&D, then he writes Dangerous Journeys, which is incredibly complex. And then Legendary Adventures, which is less complex, which is more or less his own last system of stuff, which he writes adventures for too.
I
We'll have to maybe episode. There's
oh,
an episode there talking about Gary's afterlife as a game designer. I think would genuinely be quite an
Give
interesting
me some
episode.
give me some time. I have been meaning to want to do Dangerous Journeys
Necrop,
because
yeah,
I
Necropolis is for DJ,
yes, that's
or
correct.
originally for DJ.
But
There is a
I'm
Castles
going
and
to say
Crusades version
Dangerous
as well.
Journeys is
And no,
not
sorry, there is an AD&D conversion of Necropolis,
by Trent
a
Smith. Yeah,
kind
fan
of
conversion. Yeah, for
semi-official kind
sure.
of one. Yeah,
Quasi. It's not really. Yeah, it
quasi-official.
doesn't matter. It'll probably be
Yeah,
fairly faithful, I think.
yeah.
But what I was going to say is that Dangerous Journeys, it's not that complex. What the problem is
Mm,
that because he was so traumatized by all of the TSR lawsuits, he, because they would sue based on like, you
mm.
know, your game has hit points, our game has hit points. You
Yeah,
stole, Gary, and it just like that's and it just kept hitting him with these fucking lawsuits.
yeah.
So he changed every single term
Mm.
in that book, uh, into the common parlance. So the result is almost like sort of you just have to sort of get by the cumbersome lingo and you have to figure out what basically your brain has to relearn all this crap. But
Yeah, I was
in
going to
the
say,
end,
well,
it's
it's,
just a
it's
strat
Broken
game.
Castle by Gene Weigel, similarly. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, where HP is HTK, hit to kill.
that's
Um,
still very sort of uh, Broken Castle is an easier transition than Dangerous Journey
Dangerous
because
Journey,
Dangerous
yeah.
Journey it's also a separate system, right?
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
with Broken Castle you've got AD&D to sort of map it onto. Oh, this is this, bam, move, right?
yeah, yeah.
But
Okay,
no, it would be
so
fun
let's
to
let's end up
yeah.
with we've talked about it a bit. Yeah, Well, I think late Gygax is because he's much more interesting than you'd think, because of course he's a great designer. So, yeah, last proper question: best city adventures. Let's just do that. What are the best city adventures and supplements in your view that you have read or used?
I think most of them we've already
Yeah,
covered. So City
sum
State
it
of the
up.
Invincible
Yeah.
Overlord is definitely number
Hmm.
one. Geez, I'm not very big on City Adventures. Fever Dreaming Marlinko is definitely also
Good
very
supplement.
good
Yeah,
as a
with some
location
adventures
for
in it. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
You like
Um,
swords and sorcery? You praise
I
swords and
do,
sorcery.
yes, the both one and two.
Yeah.
I would even say with V6 again. This is a tricks
A
only.
qualified, a qualified
This is
praise.
maybe check it out.
Yeah.
The nocturnal table was of course mentioned
Yeah.
before.
I was
In the
going to say,
name
if
of
you
the
want Gabor,
yeah,
Backlane Jewel of the Seas with the Nocturnal Table as a kind of like all-in city supplement and adventure.
and quite
Yeah.
a few others as well. Yeah, with Gabor. In the name of the principle, I thought was
Was the one you
quite
liked,
a
yeah.
good uh, quite a good
Hmm.
adventure taking place in a yeah in a town
Similarly,
as well.
FR1 Warsweep in the North and City System, which is EOTB approved in terms of people who hate Forgotten Realms. Um, yeah, that's a pretty good one. I've suggested Lankmar City Adventure First Edition. I actually think basically they're both useful. It's just the second adventure edition changes enough and kind of warps some stuff that you're like, okay, there are advantages to having the first edition. But yeah,
There is
yeah,
one more that I
yep, one
just
more.
thought of. It I may have underrated it a little bit actually, but it's called Temple of Lies by
Mm,
Zarkov Kowalski, and this is a little bit of a
mm,
cheat because it's really just a dungeon you can place in a city.
mm.
It's in a in an opium den
So
with
it
a
is a
hidden
it is a city
yeah
adventure location. Yeah, yeah.
yeah with a cult and everything, and it's like level one. And it's for a one shot or an introductory adventure. It's actually very good.
Yeah. Butcher Baker Candlestick Maker as I think Jeff has put a couple of supplements in there. City of Greyhawk by Carl Sargent is decent. I'm trying to think. I didn't mind Richard Baker's City of Rock of Braal. Like it's just overwritten. Basically, it's classically it ends up where you're like, I want more of this content. There's less of this content. There's like a really simple encounter system, for instance. I don't want more of this content. I want less just description of the NPCs and their faction stuff, and more what factions do. So that's a second tier, third tier kind of thing where I'm like, it's okay
You
as a
just have to
supplement.
kind of like you have to
Yeah,
grind through
yeah,
the text. Yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
Kelleran's Rumble by Malrex. Gritsy says you like
Ooh,
Malrex. I think.
ooh,
Do you like Malrex, Grits?
that's my publisher. Yes,
Yeah, you have
I
to
like
like him, don't
Malek.
you?
N- I would have I won't say I like people that are bad, but there are like like I think as a reviewer I do have to be a little bit careful
Yeah,
with
yeah.
reviewing my publisher.
Your own ecosystem, yeah. Um,
That's right.
yeah. I'm trying to think if there's I've never read City State of the World Emperor, the sequel to Invincible Overlord. I-
Um, I've glanced through it, but this is a long time ago, so
yeah,
I will
yeah,
offer no definite proclamation
yeah, yeah.
as to its
Uh,
quality
and,
or
and
merits.
I'm trying to think. Actually, a city-ish supplement I read recently for this quest campaign, Warhammer Quest, which is not D&D, but there are going to be a few out there, obviously. But it's Karakazgal for second edition Warhammer Fantasy, so early noughties, and it's not amazing, but it's just quite good at being like, here's a bunch of locations here, and there's like hooks at every location. Some of them lead into like, there's a cult here, there's a this here, this leads into the Undercity, and then there's also dungeon maps for different layers and stuff. So you're like, oh, yeah,
Well, for the
and
definitive,
yeah,
both mystery and sewer adventure,
mm,
if we're allowed
mm,
to pick Warhammer, then
yeah,
there's Shadows over Bogenhofen. With,
yeah, yeah.
I think the one caveat there was that
That's City
the
State of the World
mystery was
Emperor.
fake.
Mm, yeah,
Basically um your mystery it just kind of trails off and then something explodes, right? It doesn't
mm.
even give you the chance to
Warhammer Fantasy
find the
Roleplay
answer.
kind of does that. I would say the current edition, the fourth edition version, is quite highly rated, which is called Shadows of Over the Empire. So
Mhm.
it's Bogenhafen and so I think something else
But it was
is included too.
otherwise quite cool, even
Yeah,
though it has both a
yeah,
circus and a
yeah.
sewer
It does
and
have a circus.
and a
Yeah,
mystery. It kind of has all of these things.
yeah. But yeah, I think a lot of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay does end up blowing up. It's based. I think it's because though there's often quite tightly plotted, you get a subgenre of tightly plotted social adventures, which is good, which can have combat in them, obviously. And that's the thing that is completely transferable. That is, Warhammer Fantasy is close enough in terms of the kinds of things play characters do, not in every way, but in some ways, that you're not like completely crazy. It's a lot more trad gamey in terms of roll dice to succeed. I roll dice to convince, and that's not how D&D should run, really. I think, but yeah. I think there's some stuff there, but I think obviously it sometimes breaks down because they just have to end the book, and it has to be something contained. So that's what happens. Carl Sargent actually did write some of the Enemy Within campaign, the less well-rated stuff. This is very early on in his career, and basically this guy, who was it, Graham Morris or whoever else? I don't remember who it was. It
I
wasn't
think
him. It was
so.
it wasn't Graham Morris who said this. He did help write that, obviously.
Yes.
Graham Davis as well, but a guy who did some of the work on the first couple and then was an editor.
Jim Bambra.
No, not Bamber. It was the fourth guy, the third guy or fourth guy on those early books. But he was just talking about like being consulted about Carl Sargent's work, and him and it was Jim Bamber or whoever it was at Games Workshop being like more or less admitting to each other that Carl Sargent at that point was great at coming up with ideas, but just would be like just wrote infinite amounts of pages about it, and you're like, this was something that Games Workshop cared about because they were smaller books, smaller budgets. Whereas TSR were like, yeah, just fill up Sargent gets better for that, but certainly that problem of overwriting is there from the mid 80s and late 80s. It isn't brand new in the 90s. It is already present in first edition D&D even, I think.
Well, sort of victim of their own success, then
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah.
There is one more that I will
Yeah.
mention, but I will definitely not recommend it because it's one of the few Bruce Cordell adventures that fucking sucks. It's the first one of the Illithiad.
The Darkness Gathering.
The Darkness Gathering, that's right, and it also has a sewer component. Once again,
Yeah.
no, but this one well, it's just sort of the worst excesses of 2E with this fucking 12th level guard captain. Um, what else? Some crazy ass. Oh yeah, it's a city, but there's a level 16 wizard just living in the center of the city, just minding his own business until he gets mind controlled by the mind flayers.
Which is convenient, right? That's the
Yeah.
big thing there. Is that's a classic trad game setup, which like this is what we're saying. Cordell's adventures, the actual adventure, the thing you go and do is tends to be fairly normal D&D. Like it's like, oh yeah, this is a dungeon, this is an environment, this is a good thing. But the setups are often like, by the way, a bunch of events have happened you can't do anything about, and they're really ridiculous events. That is, I think, Darkness Gathering is the worst example for that because it's just dumb.
A girl in an inn
Yeah,
offers the party 50 gold to help find her brother, right? Like you're all
yeah,
level 9.
yeah.
What is this? Like
Oh, please,
maybe
masters, I'll give you 50 pennies.
yeah.
Yeah,
Whatever.
So yeah.
Can you also
Uh,
clean out the attic, which is filled with rats, while you're at
yeah.
it? Yeah.
No,
Come on,
exactly,
man.
exactly. So no, I don't think Cordell actually wrote another city adventure. That's actually a thing. I don't think he wrote any city adventures. Um, Apart from
Um,
that, pretty much.
I'm skimming through. No, not really.
Sea of Blood is in a city, but it is not a city adventure. It's a breakout from prison adventure if you run it as
Yeah, for the
written.
same reason that Return to the Tomb of Horrors is
Mm.
where you have to get into this the what is it, the academy, this
Yeah,
necromancer academy, basically to
Dark
get into the
Hogwarts.
yeah. That is, speaking of a fucking good magic school, the
Mm.
evil Hogwarts was the best.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, for sure. But
yeah.
so otherwise, I'm drawing a blank here. I'm sure I
Yep.
could
Okay.
dig through like my
No,
reviews. I'm sure there are. Oh,
no. Well.
there is one. We can keep going
Mhm.
for a while. The
Yeah.
in White Dwarf, it was
Mm.
Eagle Hunt, I think it was called,
Eagle Hunt.
and this was a
Eagle
very
Hunt.
good burglary adventure, complete
Yeah.
with uh, it was just very well done because you had a patrol schedule. People reacted
Mm.
intelligently to your attempts. There were guard dogs that
Yeah.
you could distract in some way. Even Kelvin Green's what was it called again? The Thieves. No Honor Among
Mm.
Thieves, or
Mm.
or some other title for LLTFP is not bad either, as a sort of
Mm.
pastiche of Warhammer Fantasy.
Yeah, do you know a video game that has, or two video games that are good at this in terms of the like in a very 90s video gaming way. It just came to mind. This is a bad example, but it's also good. Think just about the dynamic of being in a city and the things that matter. Is, of all things, Little Big Adventure is just really fun for me. Like, oh, you wander around the space a lot, like a lot of stealth games. Actually, lots of stealth games like that, where you're like, but here you also can go to shops and interact with stuff. But there might be monsters, there might be kind of encounters.
I thought you were going
So
to
yeah.
mention Thief from the Thief
No,
series,
well, no,
or
I was
Dishonored.
going to say, well, I say things like Thief and Deus Ex, and I guess more recently Dishonored. Anthony Husso, I think, did some writing on Dishonored, didn't he? Stuff like that. Like, I think a lot of that stuff is, and Gabor, of course, famous for, is it a Thief scenario he did, like a Thief mod? But a lot of those are
He's
purer
pretty
stuff.
active in the Thief
Yeah.
community, so
I
probably
think they're
more
they're a
than
lot
one
purer
mod.
stealth. I think, yeah, like it'd be interesting to hear outside of stuff like Baldur's Gate and actually obvious ones like that, video games. Put them in the comments if you're watching this on video on demand. Comments on video games that have like interesting city sections that are like actually engaging to go around a city doing stuff in. Um, not like as much as I like Bethesda games to some degree. You go to like a Skyrim or Oblivion city and you're like, I'll just wander around talking to random people. It's just completely banal.
You break into
Um,
everyone's houses
yeah,
and you
yeah, yeah, yeah,
talk with them until they give
and
you a
take their stuff.
quest.
Yeah,
You put the
exactly.
bucket
And
upside down on their heads so they're blind, and then you steal all their
exactly.
stuff. Yeah.
But cool. I guess we'll leave that there. I think because we've done our questions, we've done our content. I can't think of any other major things we've not reached. Put them in the comments if we have missed a major topic. And I think next time in a month or so, like 4 weeks, we'll probably talk. I think we talked about campaigns and high level adventuring were two topics. I don't know. Are there any other topics we should cover?
High level adventuring. I
Yeah.
think we should do
Yeah.
that. But there is I think in 4 weeks I will be I am at Cauldron then, so we'll have to
Yeah. Well, I'm not talking
delay
about
it.
four weeks exactly.
Oh
But
yeah, about a
yeah, like
month. That's
yeah,
fine.
about a month. Yeah, at the in the equivalent time in 3 to 5 weeks time, we'll resume this, and yeah, maybe campaigns for that, and maybe high level the one after that, because then no Art Punk 3 will be ending. Although maybe we should do that in December. Maybe we should have a kind of December high level adventuring one after NAP 3 has closed.
Oh, celebratory victory lap.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I'll
exactly.
have reviewed everybody's work. I'll be
Yeah,
high level gaming. It will have been reborn like a
yeah,
phoenix
indeed.
from the ashes. Yeah, for sure. That sounds like
Yeah,
a good
so
idea.
but yeah, if people want to put some suggestions in the comments for other episode, there need to be like big topics, I think, for now, at least for the first before we end up doing the we're the richest YouTube like RPG YouTubers live stream. Until that point, we need to actually be dealing with proper topics. But yeah, I don't know. Certainly campaign next time probably, and we'll see what happens afterwards. Thanks for joining us, Prince, or joining
No
me.
problem.
Thanks for joining us, everyone who's been watching. I'm going to end the stream now.